Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, angels and demons and monsters and serpents, to Brothers of the Serpent podcast, coming to you not live from the 10 by 10 by 10 tangent cube of science, nestled amongst the dusty bones of an ancient seabed high atop the Edwards Plateau. We have a very special show for you guys today. We have a guest with us, Mr. George Howard. He has a BA in political science from the University of North Carolina. He spent 6 years in D.C. as a senatorial staff member, co-author of the Firestone et al. Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences paper in 2007, and the Widespread Burning Papers in Journal of Geology in 2018, and several others in which he contributed fieldwork and analysis concerning the Carolina Bays. He owns a growing company in Raleigh, North Carolina, and runs the popular blog and website cosmictusk.com. Mr. George Howard, how are you doing, buddy?
Oh, I'm well, fellas. Thanks a lot. It's great to be with the Serpent siblings.
We are super stoked for this interview. We have talked about the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis on this podcast so many times. That is absolutely a part of the way we look at ancient mysteries. So you know so much about it. And the recently discovered the Hiawatha Crater in Greenland. We definitely want to talk to you about all these subjects.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate y'all getting the word out and continuing to investigate it as things develop.
Yeah.
Awesome, man. Well, the very first question I have for you is, where's the party?
That's right. Where's the giant party because of the Hiawatha Crater?
Oh, where's the party? Well, it's been in my head for about 20 days, you know. But I've been much nicer around the house and, you know, got to skip in my step around the office. But, you know.
Absolutely. Maybe, we have been that way, too.
Absolutely. And I hate to say that my emotions are sometimes, you know, captive to this subject. And I wouldn't say that they're just partially captive. Yeah. I try not to get the bad days get me too down and try to really enjoy the good days on it, because it moves at a glacial pace, and you know, it things pop on you, and it does change your mood, you know.
Yeah, it absolutely does.
So much time invested.
Yeah. So let's start with that, the Greenland crater. I mean, this is a big deal in like it's all over the internet. So let's start with that. What are your thoughts on it? How does it connect to the work you've done with these guys? What do you think about it?
Well, I should preface by saying, as far as Hiawatha, because it could be easily misconfused, the team that I am fortunate to be a part of from time to time, what we call the YDB team, or the Younger Impact Hypothesis team, doesn't have any special knowledge of the Hiawatha Crater, and we're a totally separate group. Right. The wonderful group that found the Hiawatha Crater are kind of similar in, you know, skill level and enthusiasm and ability to communicate this, I believe, but they ain't us, right? And then even more so, I don't even speak for us. This is a loosely knit thing, and they're very, very dear friends, so I don't come as a spokesman for my group, and I don't have any special knowledge on Hiawatha. So with those two tedious points made, it's tremendously exciting. It's validating. It's vindicating, potentially. And we've got to overlay the uncertainty of it, which will be stressed by our critics perhaps more than it should be. But, of course, there's dating uncertainty. I think it's just fine, particularly as a non-credentialed scientist like myself, to get excited about something like this and share it and speak of it in a what if it is. Because just a Pleistocene impact crater of this magnitude, period, in the largest band of time given in the recent paper, would be the last 3 million years, was supposed to be next to impossible, and surely didn't happen, or they would have known it already. Right. Yeah. So something's already happened that the establishment, most of the establishment, and that's kind of a rough term, but you know who I mean. Yes. That the skeptics who are going to be skeptical of Hiawatha, and we'll spend some time talking about that those folks would have to agree was not supposed to, would have to have been found if there was something out there. It shows us that we're still in the age of discovery, just as the co-authors of the recent paper said. Right. Now, isn't it? There's a couple of things about the crater itself that on the reading I've done, and some of the stuff that you've written about it, like the fact that it is so jagged at the bottom implies that it hasn't had time to be scoured smooth by the glacial action above it, which means that that already is an indication that either there's something extraordinary happening and the glacier isn't cutting it smooth, or it's not very old, right? Is that right? That's exactly right. And I spent this weekend puzzling as much as I had over the series of photos in the supplementary information to the paper. Have you guys had a chance to look over the original paper yet from Science? or just news reports?
I was looking at the NASA paper.
Yeah.
I don't. It's
the actual one that's published, by McGregor and Kahar and the rest of them.
Yeah,
Insights.
I haven't seen.
That's right.
I haven't
published Insights.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, so the abstract we've looked at, I haven't looked at all the details yet.
All of the data. If you dig in further, there's some great photos that actually are still a little puzzling, showing the transition between the younger Dryas ice and the Holocene ice, and as you see it through the crater, including the rough parts at the bottom.
Right.
Which indicate to those that think there may have been something cataclysmic that happened there in recent times, that's leftover debris from the impact, blocks of the first ice that fell back into the crater potentially.
Yes, I did see that.
Chaotic structures, including a central peak and possibly melt rock, bedrock below it.
Exactly.
I don't have a clear picture in my mind what that is, to be very frank, but I know they found it generally supportive of it being younger, just as you said, because if it's certainly rock features or rebound rock, that would have scraped away.
Exactly.
Just as you say, from the weight of the glaciers over the last 120,000 years of the Greenland ice sheet.
Right. And yes, I remember seeing that there was indications that there was jumbled ice at the very bottom, indicating, and that was like pre-Holocene ice, and then above that the ice is very structured and layered, right? Like all the Holocene, all the Holocene ice had been laid on top of that, very structured and layered, like we expect to see in ice cores. Everything is sort of like tree ring style, but down there at the bottom of the crater, it's all jumbled giant chunks and everything all mixed up, which indicates that it happened at that boundary, right?
That's right. And if I had a chance to ask those guys something, and I hope to, in some kind of form, I don't see how it fits that there could be blocks of ice and also potential melt rock crater.
Right.
Right. I mean, how do you have a melting crater and a chunk of ice fall back into it and the then re-solidified rock?
Yeah, and refreeze the ice. Yeah.
I don't get that yet. And I don't think they're claiming that, but you can infer some of it going in that direction. And maybe they do claim it. I do think I saw something about blocks of ice.
Yeah.
But I don't think the ice would be chaotic by the time it started laying itself back down.
Right.
But
there was also indications that some of that ice down there had impact proxy, like it was higher in iridium, the platinum group metals. So, who knows? That ice was somehow affected by the impact. Possibly. This is, who knows? That ice was somehow affected by the impact. Possibly. This is, like I remember seeing that in some of the more.
Yeah, that's actually the stuff that's coming out. That's the minerals and the, I suppose what they call in our group the magnetic fraction and the detritus that's washing out in the streams from beneath the glacier.
Okay.
Right?
All right.
Yeah, they haven't actually tested that ice yet. They're not picking up chemical signals from the ice itself.
Oh, okay. All right. Thanks for correcting me on that. Yeah.
That's fine. That's fine. And that's what I'm here for.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and gosh, and just speaking from somebody who's obsessed with it so that I've gone through every single piece of it. I do not speak from experience, and I almost certainly will make some mistakes trying to interpret or pass on the information that another team produced. So I'm excited as hell about it. I mean, there's no question that it's going to cause a lot of interest in our own hypothesis. It was great to see it back in the headlines.
Yes.
And included in the paper.
So
go ahead.
So what do you think about? I saw some of the quotes from some of the people who are more skeptical of the Younger Dryas catastrophic theories, whether it was the impact theory or not, saying that like there was one woman, I can't remember her name, forgive me for that, but she was saying, I don't see how this impact could have affected the North American continent. I'm like, do you not know what ejecta is? Like, doesn't it send up?
I don't want to misattribute it, but I'm certain enough to say, I think it was Jennifer Marlin.
Yes,
Yale.
That's right. Yeah. Ejecta, like impacts throw up giant molten droplets of stuff that fly all over the planet. Well, so talk about the Younger Dryas boundary field. Right.
I will. And also, Jennifer also needs to rule out if there were additional impacts. You can't just now, that impact is certainly enough to have, cause some climate changes. I'm sure the magnitude will be debated for years and it'll be fun to watch.
Right.
It is not necessarily the only impact site.
Exactly.
And we'll talk about that some more too.
Yeah.
But for your listeners that may be less familiar, to respond to your question, with the Younger Dryas impact field, the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, that is in its modern iteration, which covers the last 11 years, and we can talk about it before that because it goes all the way back to, well, hell, it goes back to Plato, fellas, right? As you know.
Yeah, exactly.
These claims have been made. You can find it through some strain of intellectualism.
Yes.
Has considered the Earth has been catastrophically influenced during human times, during all of human times.
Right.
So it just depends on how, I guess, put it in a shallow manner, how popular that theory is.
Right.
It's been very, very unpopular lately. But the last 10 years, a group of researchers led by some really leading lights in their own specific disciplines. Nearly all of these people are from individual disciplines. And I think they're, in the original paper, certainly there are 23 original co-authors. Now it's up to 60. But the central hypothesis is that forensic investigations of soils, well-dated soils from 13,000 years ago, reveal a suite of evidence that there was some kind of high heat event at a minimum, / impact, presumably a cosmic impact, at that well-dated time in the archaeological soils of roughly 12,872 years ago. I always have fun with the roughly part, right?
Right. Yeah. Roughly. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, because you still got to say roughly, but they got it within about 50 years, which is just astonishing.
Yeah.
And that's all well accepted, and that's an important thing that I always got to premise this stuff with. Is what it is. It's a wild explanation for a well understood, well accepted, wild fact in science now. But why? You start with a fact. And then we have the wild explanation, and I use the we and the police term not as in a loose fashion and not as their spokesman.
Is it wild just because of the prevailing theories? The prevailing scientists in what we call the standard model theory doesn't like it? Is that why it's wild, or that's just subjective?
Yeah, well, that's me calling it wild because of that reason. Okay, that it's considered, by the very, very wide mainstream.
Controversial,
it had never been considered.
Okay.
Not only has it not been dismissed, but up until 10 years ago, an ice age impact, as you'd call it, or a human impact, something within not deep time, but near time, was an unthinkable thing, that surely that would have been noted. And of course, impacts are so rare that they only occur in deep time. It was a subject that was only discussable within deep time. And its first discussion in 1980, beginning with, the father-son team, Alvarez team, who proposed that the comet killed the dinosaurs, which this is entirely analogous to.
Yes.
That all the great work that they did, we stand on the shoulder of giants, no doubt.
Yes.
It took them 14 years to have that accepted.
Right.
And then you're using very, very similar techniques. The difference is they're, testing rock and ancient clays and stuff like that. We're actually testing soil. It's so much more recent. And then you find indications within that soil that something tremendous, so something horrible happened elsewhere.
Yeah.
Because, And just to extend the theory, so that was published in 2007. And there have been, I probably should have toted them up for this, but...
Yeah, we looked at the list of papers.
Yeah, another 25, 30 at least from our group.
Right.
And then another probably 25 or 30 from independent researchers, many of whom gritted their teeth and said, good Lord, I can't believe I'm finding this stuff. And published it too. Now, the crazy history or the hypothesis, any kind of controversial paradigm change like this, that's actually getting into the literature, is going to have a rough ride. Now, it's been much, much rougher than I ever would have anticipated. And I had come out of, rough and tumble politics in Washington, D.C.
Yes.
I was no choir boy and quite a cynic, as a 30-year-old when I really got into this hard. And it blew my mind how petty people could be. It was rejected immediately. It was actually embraced immediately as a fun thing to write about by the science writing crowd. And we went down to Acapulco and rolled it out and published in PNAS about 6 months later. I hate to second guess things like this, but it could almost be analogous to the old, I don't know if y'all know the cold fusion story.
Oh, yeah.
But perhaps shouldn't have led with a press conference. But the American Geophysical Union was enthusiastic to have a press conference.
Okay.
They were following the stuff, and then they had their hemispheric conference, I think it was. It's not just the U.S. thing. It was a big thing down in Acapulco, and they set up a press conference. That's right. So, and it was a very successful press conference, and people didn't criticize it right away. They thought it was really cool, and nature and science, and everybody reported on it.
That's similar. That's similar to the Sphinx redating by Robert Schoch. He did the same thing happened to them. Yeah, they had the big press conference, and the global media went nuts, and everybody loved it. And then the scientific community came down hard on them. It's very similar. It's interesting.
Yeah, I wouldn't think that Schoch got things, like news coverage in Nature that was positive, though. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
This was, just to draw a fine point on it, I didn't know that, but it makes a lot of sense. It wasn't just the media that was enthusiastic. There seemed to be, in the science intelligentsia, some initial consideration of it. And then I think, and this is just my total, sociological inferences, that then they became horrified with some of the consequences for other long-held beliefs and agendas.
Yep.
And I think they cooled on it a bit. I do not think there was a conspiracy. Conspiracies are completely impossible on this scale, but there's certainly sociological trends and reactions and maladaptive reactions to new knowledge.
Right.
And it certainly played out that way, because what happened was the very first hints of difficulty in replication of our findings came back negative.
Yeah, there were like two groups that were unable to reproduce to get the same results. But then
then there were response papers saying that they didn't do it right. Isn't that basically what happened?
If you dig in, there was very, very little work done by the other side. It was completely out of coordination with our side, except some very, very stilted interactions, which I wasn't entirely privy to, so I don't want to speak to them.
Okay.
But there were some disappointing mishaps between, sharing samples and suspicions and whatnot, some of which was reported in that article that I know that you want to discuss later. But I think if the other side had not felt so threatened by this theory and afraid that they would get caught as supporters of it and then somebody else would prove them wrong, I think is what drives this kind of stuff, that people are overcautious. And they also, and this is very, very important, and again, I keep up with this stuff involves a tremendous amount of labor, believe it or not.
Yeah. Yes.
You have to take a bunch of sand or dirt or whatever you want to call it, and you've got to sort it and sort it and sort it again. And you've got to get that kilogram down to, nanometer-sized particles.
Right, because you're looking for microscopic.
That you're then going to look at under a transmission electron microscope.
Yeah. Yes.
If you get guys doing that don't do it as a day-to-day thing, and they go over and borrow I've listened to them. I give them more credit than they should have got. Fella Todd Sorovel, who did some of the initial stuff, who's not a bad guy. I kind of like his style a little bit. I think he's been misled by his profession, but I look forward to him coming around because he's a young enough guy. But he did major damage. Major damage. And at a conference, when we pointed out why he had failed to do the test correctly, that lives to this day as a refutation of our science, he hung his head. He hung his head. I saw him hang his head.
All right.
He never went back and did it again because he didn't sort the materials, nor did he use he used an optical microscope.
Okay, so he did it wrong, but it wasn't intentional. Is that what you're getting at there?
No. I don't think anybody should do something intentional, but I think he did it unenthusiastically and probably not terribly. And your mind can play a lot of tricks. It's, how much, if you're trying to do something that's tremendously labor intensive, and a lot of scientists, and I'm sure he is too, God knows being an archaeologist, he knows labor intensive, protocols.
Yeah.
But he'd never done this protocol. And honest to God, he probably should have had, a daily a conference call with the guys who are, not them hanging over his shoulder.
Right.
But you need a little bit of training. Say, here's precisely how we did it. And basically that was just sorting out all the basketballs from the tennis balls.
Yeah.
Right?
There was a paper.
He didn't get it down to,
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, he just didn't get down to the proper sorting, and it's since been reproduced a number of times by great labs. The Arizona, what they call it, the planetary lab there.
Yeah.
University of Arizona, and a guy named Andrei Andronikov, we've never even met. I don't think anybody in our group has ever shaken the guy's hand. It's just as independent as could get. He goes and does the exact same stuff very carefully, very tediously over a period of years, and finds everything that we find at the exact same locations where Serval had gone in and done basically one round of tests that were, I don't want to say unsupervised. One group shouldn't supervise another group, but I would say uncollaborated.
Okay, yeah.
And that's one of the things that I've kind of become more cynical about science is you think there'd be a little more when something like this breaks, calling up the other person and really setting a protocol for how you're going to test it. And there's been, So none of that. What happened was you got that initial couple of things came back negative, and they have lived on. And continue to haunt it, and it gave everyone that probably had a malicious view towards it
something to stand on,
or a very selfish view. It gave them a stopping point where they could say these tests were not, were not validated.
Okay.
Yeah. See, that's where I get a little more conspiratorial about it. Like, it reminds me of the J. Harlan Brett's thing, right? Like, when you challenge that paradigm of uniformitarianism, which everything else is based on. I mean, the human development, so all the archaeology, the story that the archaeologists are telling us about our past, the theory of evolution, and how you have to have these extremely slow, non-destructive, long period cycles in order for these things to take place in the way that the standard model says they happen. A situation like this challenges all of those paradigms, and I think that there is serious resistance to it.
Yeah.
And it's not... Go ahead.
Oh, I don't mean to interrupt you guys. I'm sorry, but
no, it's all right. We talk all the time on this podcast. This is your time.
Yeah, but y'all don't interrupt each other. I don't get my rhythm down.
We got the, I'm running the internet off my phone. We're out here in the hills. We got a little bit of lag, so we got to make room for each other. Go ahead.
Well, the poor people who work for him in my family would sympathize with you because I'm probably bad at that. But they're conspiracies, and they're conspiracies, right?
Yes.
When I said there's not a conspiracy, I don't think that the editors, there's probably some collaboration.
Yeah,
but
you got to think about it a little bit, buddy.
Let me start from the other end. There is a conspiracy that's well revealed. And that's a group of, 9 authors just called up the original paper that was so offensive that I don't feel at all for calling these folks out as an open conspiracy. Who conspired to shoot this stuff down. And they published a paper in 2011 on the basis of those first, very first failures to replicate, called the Younger Dryas Impact Hypothesis, a requiem.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Rip in peace.
Boo.
Yeah, those guys they ain't no way. They will absolutely go to their graves before they come around, and that paper showed that. And that's one of the unfortunate things, and that's why it's so bad to do to do a publication like that.
Right.
That doesn't have any original science in it. It doesn't have any field work. It doesn't have any lab work. And to say something is dead says that I can never change my mind on it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
If you said something else is bad, you got a chance in your own mind later to come back and say, it was bad, now it's good.
Right.
But you're not going to come back from saying something's dead.
Right.
Yeah. And that's just anti-science.
Unless you believe in zombies.
That could be more anti-science.
And they call it zombie theory, right?
Yeah.
Didn't you?
My gosh! Just this year. What is this? 6 years later, that meme continues from our critics.
Yeah.
And it's such a poor meme, and anybody could see through it. I mean, it's so unfair, and probably doesn't do them any good with certain other elements. That they talk about it as being The Walking Dead,
it keeps being revived,
it's being revived. It's always, and what they've tried to do, the Pinter and Ishman and Boslow and that crowd, is they tried to bury us while we were alive.
Right. That's exactly
right. And that's what's so horrifying. Just like in, literal buried wildlife.
Yeah, you're sitting there. It's not fun.
yeah. People working their ass off in labs, around the world on their spare time, top scientists with great results. And some of them, in the regular course of their job, particularly the ones that went and validated us, they were all doing it for their labs. Most of our people are doing it one way or another on the side.
Yeah.
Okay, but then to tell those people that they're dead, that their work doesn't mean anything,
right?
That their next paper shouldn't be published.
Yeah.
That's bad stuff.
So I want to ask you about a paper. So at Randall Carlson's website, Sacred Geometry International, which we are big fans of both Randall and the website. He had posted links to a paper published that was supposedly had evidence against the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis in the sense that they were looking at microspherules in I can't remember all the details, but they looked in a place that had ancient occupation, and they claimed that the microspherules in the soil there came from house fires. Do you know what I'm talking about? The paper was flawed. It was flawed, and when I read the paper, it seemed, and I've talked about this on the podcast before, it was flawed in the sense that they didn't go out and do test checks out in the desert away from the occupation area to see if there were microspherules out there. They just said, look, we found them in this ancient occupation place in the same layer as the quote-unquote Younger Dryas boundary field, and therefore the Younger Dryas boundary field these are mistaken. These are just from house fires because these houses all burned down. That was their claim in the paper, basically.
You know what? One of the bigger problems of the lead authors. Excuse me, I'm getting some feedback now, but one of the biggest problems the lead authors have is getting contacted by researchers around the world that are finding it and are wanting to publish. And they say, we can't. We got 3 papers backed up. We're doing Chile in a couple of months, trying to work on the Syria paper. People are finding this stuff all over the world. Right. And the channel, I don't know what paper you're talking about, and I'm better on the specifics because I'm, again, such a geek on this stuff. So if I don't know that it's that paper, if it was a thing in the Channel Islands, they went and tested the same spot, except it was 600 meters away. Right. I mean, and not that you shouldn't find it uniformly, but you've got to do a certain protocol. And actually, and I say that advisedly because that almost sounds like a fraudster. If you don't follow my rules exactly right, right, then people play those games, and I get that, and I get how it could look that. Now, again, I don't mean to speak for our team, but I recognize that people say, their defenses, their protocols, but it's also very true, particularly within very, very narrow, unfamiliar, rarely performed testing procedures.
Right.
You got to do it just right. And I think that's why Andronikov and people like that who have gone out and really taken the time, but not collaborated, but I think done it carefully, publish again and again and again that they're finding.
Yeah.
But not everybody has a TEM, translation microscope in their basement.
Right.
Yeah. It takes a certain kind.
Yeah. So hey, in that light, let's talk about the Boz bet for a minute.
Oh no.
What's going on there?
The unrequited wager. Yeah, he hadn't gotten back to me yet, and of course I'm second guessing the amount because I want the intellectual part to cause him pause, not the size of the bet.
Right, of course.
But it's also, such a good bet for him. He says it's a 1 in 10,000 chance. I think somewhere in the stuff it is.
Right.
Well, hell, I'm not asking for $1 and he pays me 10 grand. That's normally the way that would work.
Right.
If someone says, I think something's a 1 in 10,000 chance, I should be able to bet $1 and he pays me 10.
Right.
So I just said, okay, I'll bet you 10.
Yeah.
Straight up, 1-to-1.
Yeah.
Hadn't heard back. Now, it always surprises me when these loud people never answer. These people that talk and just absolutely put themselves out on every subject, but they won't get back to you or after calling for a bet. So,
of course,
to give your listeners the background, and I'm sorry to have not done that right off the bat.
No, it's all right.
There's a gentleman, Mark Boslow, who's a retired federal scientist at Sandia Labs out in New Mexico, who has been the chief critic of our evidence and our publications since 2007, 2008. and I've met him personally, very briefly, and have followed very closely, and do not feel that I criticize him unfairly. I do believe he has more than criticized our group unfairly, and perhaps embarrassed himself, for the rest of his career, the way things are turning out. And we could talk about that a little bit later as more. But I took the opportunity. He came out with some first responses on Hiawatha and said,
Uh-oh.
We lose him?
You there, buddy?
Would happen.
There it goes.
Recently in the human past. And it's a very, very kind of subtle thing. Okay, and I can get into that part's the fun part, but there's actually something a little, I think, kind of profound going on about the way you look at things. And I hope I don't get, too deep or geeky about it. But what he's saying is that the impact is too recent. He's not saying it, but we're an extraordinary thing. We're sitting here, humans that are able to detect these things and look back into the past. I believe these things are infrequent. Yeah, they are infrequent. That's true. It may be big ones like an extinction impact like this, may be, just on the level of 5 to 10 million years, right? Probably a little bit more recently than they say now, but not a whole lot, full-scale extinction of multiple species.
Right, yeah.
Okay, like happened, again, for your listeners, 12,900 years ago, and during that 1,000 years, many, many animals went extinct. We think it was because of the impact, not at one moment, but over time and because of the effects. So back to Bosla, he says that to have that impact recur so recently is unlikely, because if you cut the last, let's say it's 1 million years, and you cut the 1 million years up into 110,000 year tranches of potential for something to have happened that'll happen once in 1 million years, and you're sitting at the very, hole number 99 in the roulette wheel, what's the likelihood of that ball landing in hole 98 and being so close to you?
Yes.
Right?
Right.
There's something a little seductive about that, because I remember my dad teaching me that every card hand is independent, that every roll of the dice doesn't know what happened last time. That if you roll 10 double sixes in a row, the next time you roll it, it's going to be the same odds you're going to get double sixes the first time you rolled. I get all that, right? But all those bets are off if our ability to observe and understand the impact is a result of the impact itself.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right? Then we're not two independent things in time that should be considered sitting in little pockets around a roulette wheel.
Yeah.
That we're related to it. It's as silly as saying, all the odds are against your birth date being so close to your parents' birth date and within 80 years.
Yeah.
No. Your parents' birth date and your birth date are intimately related.
Yep.
And it would be, our ability to understand this event is directly related to the event itself, as you gentlemen hypothesize as well, and it's going to be an increasingly important part of this discussion and the Younger Dryas impact, is that it could have very well led to humans settling down and creating the cultures of the Levant and Mesopotamia and whatnot that really flourished 5,000 years later, but began 12,000 years ago with agriculture.
Right.
Yeah.
And Göbekli Tepe happens very, very soon after this impact event.
That's right. And that's all totally speculative. Happy to talk about it, but it's a hell of a coincidence.
Yeah.
Right.
That you would have such an unusual monument, clearly a monument, whether it's recording time or recording animals that were jumping around, is what's at question now. But to have something like that, was it related? Obviously, Göbekli Tepe, the great interest about it is, what was the status of people at the time? This is independent of the Younger Dryas research.
Absolutely.
Because those people were supposed to be hunter-gatherers.
Right.
And they were, according to evidence at the site indicates they still were hunter-gatherers. But very close around then, they start to grow wheat in southern Turkey and Syria.
Exactly.
And then you start to store the wheat, and then you've got to keep count of the wheat, and then all of a sudden you got numbers, and then you got writing, and then you get us.
Right. And some of the animals carved on the pillars there are ones that went extinct in that period, So it's very interesting that there's these correlations between these sites, and I know you don't want to speculate on that, but at this podcast we find this all very interesting, and just like you said. So let's just stipulate for a second that whatever the cause, the Younger Dryas was cataclysmic and catastrophic, and did turn what was generally a kind of a mild climate world into a place that was much harder to live in, right? So if you have large...
That's right. All of that's well accepted.
Right. So if you have large human groups, or even smaller human groups that used to be able to kind of move around and sort of live off the land, it became suddenly a lot more difficult to do that. A lot of the animal species you might have been chasing around suddenly are gone, or a lot harder to find. Water is moving all over the planet, right? Huge inundations of the ocean, the sea levels are rising, like crazy, and meltwater pulse play.
All well accepted?
Right, all well accepted. So you end up with, at least, like you said, agriculture, because suddenly people have to find out a way to have food without trying to just sort of find it lying around on the ground or growing in trees, right? So you get...
Exactly, Russ. In fact, is this Russ or Brett?
This is Russ.
I mean, Russ or... Yeah, hey, Russ. Okay, exactly. I refer to it as they kind of went from plucking pears to pulling plows.
Yes, right. That's fantastic.
Yeah,
nice alliteration.
Talk about an oversimplification. The poor guys who were toughing it out for the 10 centuries to figure that one out, right? We're not doing them no justice with that cute summation.
Yeah,
but that's what happened. They went from plucking pears to pulling plows, and that was because they had a tough time.
Right.
And again, all of that's, I wouldn't say that part is well accepted. That's all still, but it's well discussed in the literature. It has its advocates and its probably its detractors. But then the question is, what caused the cold period that caused them ultimately for people to settle down and change their life ways?
Right.
In a way that facilitated the civilizations that we saw, later, and even our own.
Right.
So which are independent which are not independent from the impact. So thus, it should not surprise Boslow to see the impact. If I were able to ask him a question straight up, it would be along those lines. It would be, well, Mark, now that we found the crater particularly, this should, at least deserve an answer. If something in the last, let's just say 3 million years occurred like this, would it have anthropological implications that could have led to changing of life ways,
right,
et cetera? I think you'd have to say yes if it happened the last 3 million years. Well, did something happen? Well, that was just published in Science 3 weeks ago.
Right. And then there's the other thing I was getting at. So you have the agriculture. We talk about this, the 3 A's of ancient civilizations, right? Agriculture, architecture, and astronomy. Why were they obsessed with the sky? A good possible answer is that they almost got killed by something giant coming out of the sky, right? You know what I'm saying?
That's right.
They began to
Absolutely.
So we talk about that all the time here. That I totally agree with you. I read your whole Bosbet article on there, and I was like, oh my god, this is exactly right. These two events are not disconnected from each other, or at least you can look at it. Yeah.
No, that's great that somebody's looking at that. I even have trouble with some of our own researchers when I talk to them, because they want to argue like my dad used to. Every card's independent. I get that.
Yeah.
But that's only if you're playing cards with independent cards.
Right. Right. You got to shuffle the deck every time.
Cards and they're related cards, and it's actually a slinky.
Right.
Instead of a deck of cards, then you're talking a different game,
Right, exactly. And you have to reshuffle the deck every time you deal a hand. Otherwise, it will be related to the cards that were in the previous hand.
That's right.
You know what I'm
That's
saying?
exactly right.
Right.
That's right.
So you can't say that the deck has been shuffled every time that there's an impact. Well, it does shuffle a lot of things, right? It throws all kinds of stuff all over the planet. But you can see a possible, speculative at this point still, but a possible correlation and thus maybe causation, just like you were saying, that human civilization and the advancement of it, the changing of it from pear picking to plow pushing, is completely reliant on this catastrophic period. Whatever caused the catastrophe, we don't know yet necessarily, but this hypothesis is a good answer to a lot of the big problems with the Younger Dryas. Why did it melt and then refreeze so quickly?
Dude, that's exactly what I was about to say, is that it's all about answering problems.
Yes, exactly.
And this is an interesting field in that a lot of times when there's a scientific paradigm change, at least the other paradigm has the answers, even if they're wrong. but this one, it's like shit. People have been arguing for 40 or 50 years about what killed the megafauna.
Right.
And you would think it would be obvious, and it's going to turn out in retrospect, yeah, it was obvious.
Yes, exactly.
There was a dark line of soil every time you saw the last mammoth bone.
Yeah. So talk about that. The black mat. The black mat. You gave a great description
Well,
of that.
I'll give you some things that are kind of misunderstood about it first.
Okay,
you know, it's the black mat itself is not cosmic, right?
Yes.
Nor is it burn material in particular.
Okay.
You might find places like that ultimately, and maybe some of the sites that we've tested may show some of that, but the actual material that they find, the spherules and the glass objects and the scoria type stuff and whatnot, all of that is under the black mat, immediately under it.
Okay.
And in fact, it doesn't even necessarily show itself in the color of the soil, but you're kind of already into the black mat a little bit anyway, right?
Okay, all right.
But they test under it. So even our critics say, they claim there's this burn layer. And yeah, we do claim there's a burn layer, but it's not actually the black part. The black part is kind of the cold, dank algal world that existed thereafter. And just the change in the hydrology, the change in the climate, the change in the veg, the kind of death and destruction, you know, well, I won't say death and destruction because it's not immediate primary evidence. It was that 1,000 years created a darker soil.
Post-impact goo.
Post-impact goo. Exactly, man. Exactly. Which is a damn good indicator.
Yeah.
You know, and that's the marker there. And I think it's these archaeologists for decades have, you know, understood the black mat, and they'd get to the black mat and know that that's the hot area, and that's where you're going to start picking up the megafauna bones.
Right, and the Clovis.
Not to mention the Clovis points.
Yeah.
Not exactly. And it all ends at the black mat, and that is all very well established. So back to what we were saying about, you know, providing answers. You know, the big question that we were just discovering, which I guess is the big question, you know, why are we here? Why are we smart? Why are we this exception to what doesn't, you know, seem to be the rule in animal life to be these smart naked apes?
Right.
You know, but and then lesser questions like what happened to, so that's an unanswered question.
Yeah. And
then what happened to the megafauna for years unanswered. What caused the younger Dryas, which is a little geekier, but a very, very active scientific debate over the last 30 years. I noticed Anders Carlson's paper, What Caused the Younger Dryas, remains always has been, ever since I've been looking at this stuff, since it was published, the most popular geology paper in the world.
Right.
And that was in geology, which is kind of strange, but what caused the younger Dryas? I believe it was. Okay, so that's a huge debate with no answer to it.
Right.
And then we're not trying to overturn. How can you overturn 3 other bad answers? Right.
Yeah, they're already bad.
You know, yeah, that's right. And right now the bad answers are there's a big lake that drained to the northwest through the McKenzie Delta, or there was a big lake that drained through the St. Lawrence Seaway, or there was a big lake that catastrophically drained through the Mississippi and whatnot. You know. Right. Okay. Well, they're arguing about which way the lake went.
Yep.
You know.
You're talking about Missoula, right?
Yeah, what the hell caused this exceptional circumstance to break the lake up in such a dramatic fashion? If you call it just a lake, the whole ice cap broke. Right. Yeah. You know, in our opinion, what the hell caused that? Yes. And as you know, that a big, well-accepted part. This is kind of cool, and probably something I can add to people. You know, more than what you could find easily on the internet. Or I guess you could, but Jim Kennett is one of the leading lights of our publishing group, which you'd call one of the lead authors. Okay. And he's at the University of California, Santa Barbara, and he's actually, some people say he certainly would demur, but the founder of the discipline of paleoceanography. Okay. And drilling cores, you know, out in the sea on big ships and a whole bunch of other stuff too. But he's a well-established guy and a member of the United States National Academy of Sciences, right, which is the highest honor that you can have and the most elite scientists in the world. And he was on the original paper, and you know that was very valuable to us. But he made his name defining that there were giant freshwater pulses into the Atlantic and actually down into the Gulf of Mexico as well. He did a lot there. But him and other work by folks like Wally Broker, who's an important person on this I'd like to talk about, who's the big climate scientist at Columbia, by saying that the the cold period occurred because fresh water went into the North Atlantic and shut down the Gulf Stream.
Right.
Right? Okay. And again, that's a great finding, but that's not the end of the story. And what it makes sense that it's one of the great figures of figuring that out 30 years ago went on to keep looking what the hell caused that to happen. What caused
that's a lot of
meltwater?
meltwater. Yes.
Yeah, kept pulling the thread. Right. And he got here, and he got to it, and he's right. And his publications one day will read perfectly. He followed it all the way through his career and got there.
Right.
That there wasn't a dramatic discovery for Jim Kennett, particularly. You know, it's not surprising. He didn't get lucky to be first in line of scientists to figure this out. He was already there. And the fascinating thing is, and this, I've got a blog post on it, on the Cosmic Tusk, that his longtime collaborator and even a more elite scientist and considered the grandfather or even godfather, those kind of negative connotation, of climate scientist, Wallace Broecker, who's I think 87 years old, goes to work every day and has a huge lab that he runs at Columbia Lamont Observatory in Columbia University in New York. He's the father of modern climate science. He wrote a memo to his lab staff, I think it was in the last year and a half, saying that he believes that the YD was caused by this. And he was the father of the modern understandings of the Younger Dryas.
Wow.
And he says clearly, in fact, the quote is, I'll call it up because it's too rich to believe. And then to see it not covered by the regular climate people who have quoted him for years and years and years, and climate blogs and
selective reporting. Yeah,
it is extremely selective. To see a godfather, it's actually on the second page of the Tusk, at least I did. Although I don't for a minute believe that this impact did in the Mammoths and the Clovis people, I do think that it triggered the YD. And he invented it. And there are people out there on Twitter, scientists, and then you're not really getting the blogs because they're being very, very quiet now after Hiawatha. Very, very.
I've also seen a lot of goalpost dragging.
Oh yeah,
they're dragging goalposts all over the place.
That's what I wanted to bring up in terms of the Boz bet. Is like I went and looked up some little short paper that he wrote. I mean, it wasn't really a paper; it was like a little response that he had written about the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis before Hiawatha. And he was basically saying no crater, therefore it's all BS.
Right.
And now there's the crater, and he's like trying to push. It's like
dragging goalposts.
Yeah.
Exactly. This is what I wanted to ask you about this. Maybe a brief aside, real quick here, because I've noticed this. Like just like with the J. Harlan Bretts thing, like Bretts sees all this evidence in the field of an enormous single, an isochron, right? A single event that happens in a short period of time that just causes all this stuff, and they're like, well, you don't have the heat, but since you can't tell us where the heat came from to melt all this water, or you don't have a source for the water, it didn't happen.
Yeah.
Isn't that
keep away?
Right. Isn't that faulty reasoning?
Absolutely it is. And it's just bad. It's poor sportsmanship. If you look at this stuff as having some kind of Geneva rules,
Right.
Which it does. Like I said, this stuff, it's worse than politics.
Right.
That they move the goalposts, all the time.
Right.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just actually got distracted by my own blog.
Well, it's a fantastic blog, man.
Looking for typos. Excuse me, right in the middle of the podcast. It's tough being a pajama blogger. Particularly one that is very prone to typos. And people are always welcome to correct me, please. But
no typos on the podcast.
Yeah, they move the goalpost all the time, and I think it's getting a little old. And here's the good news, folks. We could sit here, and it reveals a lot about the dark side of science, if you will. Yeah. But there's a bright side to it. And these are the loud people, okay? And the loud people are generally, and by that I'm talking about the science communicators.
Okay.
And that's what I'm kind of focusing on these days. And that sweeps up a lot of people. Now, strangely, Boslow has not been silent on this, but all the science communicators, Phil Platt at Bad Astronomer.
Yeah. I've read his stuff.
Yeah.
It's dripping with scripture.
Yeah, and then you get the real superstars like Michio Kaku and
Neil deGrasse Tyson.
And Neil deGrasse Tyson about to get there. First of all, those guys were strategic enough. The ones I just mentioned, they've never once addressed our theory.
Not do that.
Communicating all the time, just communicating and communicating and communicating on the, every 15 minutes by Twitter and podcasts and speeches and whatnot. Never a word, those big guys. And I think, as I said, and it's true for a lot of the smaller ones too, that their silence is particularly deafening now. You could say, well, they've got their subjects and, this is controversial. Maybe they keep it out of their regular routine. But to not say anything after Hiawatha is just a real failure of science communication. And then there's a level below those that I discuss in this, same post I just mentioned that's on the front page of the Cosmic Tusk, that talking about the other, science communicators that are probably less prominent to them, that have a lot to offer this theoretically, because they're pretty smart people and they've read all the papers and they know what's at stake about human history and the history of the Earth, but they won't speak of this,
Right.
Which is just terrible. At least the people who've moved the goalpost are talking, right?
Yeah, that's true. Right? Got a point there. You got a point there.
Okay, so let me give you the bright side. From what I hear from the credentialed researchers in our group, and I don't speak to them comprehensively, but I do have a feeling for what they're hearing, and I do stay in touch with members of them regularly, is that they're hearing back from the hallways and the symposia and the emails with colleagues at different schools and whatnot that we're over the hump on this thing, even before Hiawatha. That the last round of papers last March or February, whatever it was, the World Burn papers.
Right, the burn papers.
That's right. They were published. Those are just, wonderful, very, very comprehensive, well-reviewed. Had tough reviewers, ones that used to reject us, right? And there's a lot to all of that drama, in the past when you just get the papers flat out rejected or stalled.
Right.
But even those people, it made it through review. And with people that weren't even hostile reviewers, the readers out there, but the readers in the labs, the Q givers, perhaps a little bit under the hood as Q givers, but Q givers behind the scenes.
Yeah, Sub Rosa. I heard you about to say that.
Sub Rosa. Yeah, like Wally Broker, but he's actually public now. But that actually slipped out on the internet that he had written that memo. That memo just popped up. I don't know if he certainly didn't write a blog post. But those people, what I'm trying to say, guys, I'm going on too long, is that we probably got the majority of Earth scientists that are following this now think it is a very, very clear possibility.
That's great.
Right, and that it deserves further research, and that we aren't, the worst claims aren't true. Certainly that there's no fraud going on.
Right.
Or we're fooling ourselves, which just kills me. And that was the point of, recent Science News article, is that it's such an exciting thing that it can change people's ability to discriminate between good evidence and bad because it is so groundbreaking. Well, yeah, that might be true if they popped out a 10-page paper because they thought they found something at a Clovis site, and that was it. But now it's, up to 65 authors, in 20 or 30 countries,
multiple disciplines.
many labs, multiple papers. Yeah, nobody's fooling themselves at this point.
Right.
Well, not to take it back into the gutter of pessimism, but I have this, I've already made this prediction to Russ and to our friends that talk about this stuff, is that okay, they've got this window. They're saying around possibly 12,000 years to 2 million years or whatever, and they're gonna start just keep creeping it back.
Yeah,
that's what I'm predicting, and it's like, what's you've seen this happen so many times. Like what we keep bringing up is the J. Harlan Brett's, the Zula flood, is that they kept making it. Oh well, it was 2 floods. It was 8 floods. It was 40 floods. It was 80 floods.
Yeah, that's up to 70 floods now.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. So it's like, what's to?
I think it'll be less subject to that. You've got a good point, and that's why this is going to be an interesting and challenging ride from here out as well.
Yeah,
right.
Because you have to remember that you're challenging uniformitarianism, and that is a lot more than just the Younger Dryas and recent climate. You are challenging a bedrock of geological thought.
Indeed, we are.
Yes,
sir. And people appreciate how rigid that bedrock is, and how much it influences sciences, and that particularly geology has just been terribly burdened by it.
Right. Yeah. Well, basically, we can definitely say that this crater discovery is a catastrophe for uniformitarianism.
yeah, it is a catastrophe for them. Exactly. But again, back to the a little bit. Is this subject to that kind of goalpost moving? My gut says probably not. That there'll be a lot of that, and it's going to be a rough ride. But I think you can empirically prove this within 2 to 3 years.
Yeah,
I gave Boz 2 generously.
right. And the other thing with Brett's is he was by himself. You guys have a huge team.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Brett's was alone.
Well, just think of this: what if the damn crater were on the seafloor, and they'd gotten some kind of preliminary evidence, and we all got excited, but it was just even more difficult to get to.
Right. Yeah.
Right. You can't fly up to this thing. I forget where I saw it, but the science team only spent 18 hours out there to publish. Wow. That ain't a lot of time.
It's not a lot of time.
So they were doing it on the side too.
Oh, yeah.
But I would imagine now that the grants are going to flow.
Right.
Money of some sort, or at least attention and redirection of existing missions, such that they'll be able to get out there and collect evidence that they may not even know of yet,
right,
and may not be seeking, but just pure getting your hands dirty field investigations may reveal some things. Personally, I think that one of the things that's probably going to come into play, and I saw a hint of it. I've gone over, I think, every utterance these fellas have made, and there have been several different forms, but somewhere in there, and it makes sense to me, that I think that water that's coming out from beneath the glacier is surprisingly hot.
So see, I was joking about this the other day. Like, it's not a smoking gun. The crater is practically still smoking.
That's right. Well, we don't know that yet. They didn't say that it's smoking.
I know. It's a joke. I think it's funny.
But I heard a little on the QT along those lines, which is not much there for you, but and that doesn't mean that this is boiling water within the core of this thing. There's some little, still molten rock.
Right. Of course not. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But it's just it's warmer than it would normally suggest. Yeah. Okay. Well, it's a geothermal hotspot. But if you have a geothermal hotspot that's also surrounded by a morphologically perfect crater, you might have to take the geothermal vent part out.
Right.
That you're dealing with remnant kinetic energy and heat.
Exactly. It's still smoking.
Still smoking, buddy. How else can you say it? I mean, it's not even a damn analogy. I mean, that's going on. Still smoking. And say you come up with something like that, and I don't want to set the bar to that, for God's sakes. Right. There are a lot of other ways to get to it. And they had a paper that didn't get published. If you look, there's an abstract that several of them tried to get, and then they pulled it back because it was a cryptic little reference from the journal that says there's something else in preprint. And it was about finding certain organic carbons, from beneath the thing, that they had some other evidence that they're not talking about. And there's also the chance and I heard this on the QT, I don't think this is unfair to share, that that within the ice, there was a lot of plankton. All right? That there was organic material.
Right.
In that case, living, dead bodies of, living, what is? I guess plankton's a plant. Yeah.
Right.
But you can date it.
Yes.
Right. It kind of surprised me if you could date little tiny bits of plankton, but I probably can these days. But let's just say, apparently the recommendation was that you can test stuff like that, and to test it, carbon date it.
Right.
So let's say they have something kind of oddball type of organic material that they can get to within the ice column. Get down to the bottom, you test it, and it's within the range, you might have it.
Yes.
Right.
Wow.
Well, we're gonna take a break. We're up at the hour mark.
Let's do it.
But before we do, I just want to I have this fascination with aptronyms. Okay, like the right names, and it just blows my mind that the guy's name is Firestone.
Yeah.
Firestone. Yeah. Comes out with a theory about the giant burning ball of fire that comes out of space. How does this happen?
There has never been anyone that has encountered this research and not said the same thing to themselves.
Okay,
right?
cool.
I'll be damned. What a name.
Yeah, Firestone and West.
And West, because it totally...
It happened in the West.
It totally rewrote the West.
Right. Well, I love another key scientist, which is doesn't not tell it all, but is Dr. Goodyear. He had Firestone and Goodyear key figures. So there's some kind of
something happening there.
Catastrophic. Some kind of catastrophic rubber meme out there, right? Yeah, hot rubber stuff.
All right, we're going to take a quick break, and we will come back afterwards. I want to talk to you about the Alaskan muck and some other things that you've got on your blog. So,
hey, thanks, pal.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Yes.
Fastest 2 hours in podcasting. The table is loaded. We're back here at Brothers of the Serpent podcast with George Howard, and we're going to get right back into it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So, where are we going?
Well, I wanted where do you want to go? I wanted to ask you at some point about the Alaskan muck, but,
Y'all take it wherever you like.
Well, I definitely I got introduced to the concept of all these animals and plants being frozen in the Alaskan muck, of course, with Velikovsky's books. But, you have written a lot about it, so I want to get your take on that whole thing. And do you think that this is connected to this Younger Dryas event?
Well, it's kind of a funny one. And I'll tell you that most of the speculation about the Alaska mucks has historically been driven by old material from a guy named Hibben, who went up there, and he published in, Saturday Evening Post or, Harper's or something like that in the late 50s, an investigation that he said returned from Alaska and found heaps of bones, and I believe they were caused by catastrophic occurrence sometime fairly recently.
Right.
And that caused, as catastrophism sometimes does, a buzz nationally. And then I think it was kind of well disregarded. And I was always a little bit of a skeptic. It never, added up to me that I guess that they would, that we wouldn't see them today. That now that people have crawled all over Alaska, you wouldn't have tested those heaps of animal remains thoroughly enough to have missed that it all happened at once, right?
Yeah.
So I was a skeptic of that part of catastrophism for, most of the time that I've been interested in this stuff. My mind was changed by parts of the Younger Dryas Boundary team who published a year ago a paper that got absolutely zero attention, but it was well published in Nature Reports, a top journal outlet, that they had done a series of tests that indicated something did happen in the past. And I can speak a little bit more about how that's interesting to me personally. With regard to the cosmic tusk, which is kind of my signature thing and what I build my blog around, or at least the name came from. And also I own a mammoth tusk from that period. That tusk, as profiled in a National Geographic Explorer in 2009, when this stuff was getting on TV pretty regularly, played an interesting role as a red herring with regard to the Younger Dryas impact. Okay. And to kind of summarize, which was a lot of back and forth and speculation at the time, that Firestone and West had identified some pieces and parts from various sources that seemed to show some indications that they had been associated with a cosmic impact.
Right.
Including nickel-rich iron being splayed on the site and in some cases actually embedded into the bones. Okay, so they had these pieces and parts. This was kind of a sideshow to the archaeological investigations of the Black Mat.
Okay.
And but they got them tested. So as shown in National Geographic, actually with the symphony music and the drama and all of that, it comes to the point, that because the tusk played a big role, that maybe this is evidence of the 13,000 year ago impact that these guys claim happened, et cetera, and so forth.
Yeah.
And then they dismiss it in the narrative as it should have been, because the dates came back. And the tusk that I own now is 37,000 years old.
And they dated it how? What was the dating process?
Carbon-14.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not too old to be non-datable.
Right.
And can be reliably dated and, somewhat inexpensively, but it was paid for. The other pieces also came back dated around that same time. So here you are studying something where you have vast evidence for something that happened roughly 13,000 years ago, trying to put together other evidence, think you may have some animal parts, but they all date and they all show this weird material, but it's at another point in time, right? What do you do with that?
Right.
So they sidelined it. They said maybe something else happened. Okay, we got to move on. And they moved on with the Younger Dryas event. And it still comes back, that is confused to the public, and that's fine, to the people that, even some of the people that follow this, confused that those pieces and parts from those early days were ever associated directly with this. But no, they weren't in the first paper, etc. But they're kind of part of the lore. Okay, so then fast forward to today. During that time, a lot of the progression of writing these papers and doing the investigations, particularly of something of this nature, just drags on and on forever.
Right.
I mean, it's almost like communicating across the sea to England,
Yeah.
I mean, the emails and the working on the paper. But a guy named John Hagstrom, who's a fantastic fella at the United States Geological Service in Menlo Park, California, and who's a well-published polymath on several subjects, even outside of his discipline for USGS, which is paleomagnetism, right? So he also does bird migrations, and he's also interested in impacts and how their faunal remains may show them. So he's actually the fellow who directed me to take a core of my tusk that we had managed, by Skype and whatnot from Menlo Park, and he tested and a lot of forensics there. But Hagstrom worked through producing a paper that was published last year that laid these dates out and said that there is a number of different pieces and parts, most of them housed at the Natural History Museum in New York, right?
Okay.
That if you go to their, if you will, paleo files there and go back and get the old stuff that Hibbins sent back. I don't know if it was him. I forget the other guy's name that was from the Natural History Museum, but sent back tons and tons of material from the heaps of Pleistocene megafauna that you find in the muck of Alaska. When you go in and take the soil out from, say, inside the bison's horn, right? You got an old bison skull, it's got a horn, and there's still some dirt in there, right?
Okay.
When you go scoop that dirt out and test it, you find the microspherules.
Oh.
And when you test that head that had the soil in it, it's 37,000 years old, etc. Right. So those animal remains in the muck of Alaska are also seem to be infused with some type of very high temperature vaporized metallic materials.
So
Be very specific about it, which would tie it to another
cosmic event,
another catastrophe in the past.
Right.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. And that's I'm trying to remember my dates here. The LGO, the last glacial maximum was, well, was it 25,000 years ago?
I think that's 22,000 years ago, somewhere around there.
Okay, so if you go all the way back to 37 or 35, whatever the dates they're getting there, could we have some kind of impact event that causes what we end up with in the LGM later on? A cooling process because of an impact on land, which would be the only way you get microspherules and stuff like that. Impacts in water don't cause microspherules, right? Am I right on that?
Yeah, well, not entirely sure of that.
Because it dives through water and you get an impact in the ocean bed, but it can't throw microspherules and nanodiamonds all over the planet, right?
No, because the the KT impact, right?
Oh, that one was big enough to do it. You're right.
Impact, right? But I don't think that. I think that hole is so hot and volatile at that moment that the water that covers it doesn't prevent the distribution of vaporized material target rock.
Interesting.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're probably dragging it too far in the weeds here, but
no. We talk about this kind of stuff all the time. Yeah, the whole impact.
What I like.
Impact physics is a big deal to us.
We live in the weeds.
Well, I wish you had a better guest. I might know a little bit more because I'm associated with these guys who told me for hours over the phone how this stuff works. So I'm not a primary source, but I'll help you as I can.
That's great. So I was just thinking, and this is of course speculation. You can't really answer the question, so I'm sort of asking rhetorically. But it's possible that the reason these animals are appear to be associated with a previous impact that may have ended up causing what we call the last glacial maximum later on, that then began
dramatic climate swings, which are noted all the way through the record, other than the Younger Dryas, that they may have an impact correlation.
Exactly.
Right? That's completely unstudied and would be completely revolutionary and even more amazing than what we're talking about in general tonight. Right?
Yes.
That this one instance 13,000 years ago. But I do absolutely believe there have been, more minor impacts that affected climate in some regard since then.
Yes.
13,000, and surely there were before.
Right.
If they explained the, Dansgaard, Oscar events, or whatever they call them, the DO events, which go like a metronome into time, I'd be kind of surprised.
Yeah.
But I think it's absolutely on the table.
Right.
And when you start finding craters that probably occurred closer to 12,000, but surely within 3 million years ago, it's time to start talking about that
exactly.
stuff. And that's why it's so fair to put it on the tables and and fun to see you guys talking about it.
So what about, and again, this is something probably that you're correct me if I'm wrong, but the Comet Research Group, they're looking at the beginning of the Younger Dryas, right? Not the end. Is that correct?
That's exactly right.
So what caused the end? Because it's another giant meltwater pulse. You see what I'm saying? Like the end of the Younger Dryas was also catastrophic.
The Serpent Bros, the Cosmic Tusk doesn't know everything. I mean, come on now.
Hey, well, we have standards on this show. We try to get almost everything wrong.
Not everything.
Oh, right.
Just almost
everything. Speculate to the point that you're almost surely wrong.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah. We don't want to get everything wrong. Just almost everything.
That's right. You're right. Just keep speculating till surely.
Yeah, that's right.
No, I don't know. I think that's just a wonderful mystery.
Yeah.
And it's one that kind of, either undermines or perhaps if you stretch it enough supports the impact hypothesis. Right?
I think it supports it.
Particularly if there were repeated, and I've talked to some of the good minds about this, who are in agreement in general with everything we're speaking about and parts of the team to varying degrees. And they're a little bit mystified by it. Well, and you can't say that, just if I can, that one of the problems with the current way of approaching the Younger Dryas, people will point out, is that it relies on a tipping point and a, kind of a mathematical moment where it all goes haywire, but it's a closed system.
An isochron,
right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and now what we're saying is, this is not a isochron. This is not a moment of haywire. This is not a tipping point. This is an external influence that's completely well understood that change things.
Yes.
But then if we rely on the outside, 1,200 years later, when we snapped out just as suddenly as we went into the Younger Dryas, we returned to just perfect conditions, which have been maintained statistically, now for 13,000 years. It's either another impact or we're dead wrong, and the climate system does snap suddenly back and forth.
Yeah.
The coming out of the Younger Dryas, but I almost see it. I don't know if it ever since they built Göbekli Tepe then as well.
Yes.
They recognized what a miracle had happened.
Right.
Yeah. So what occurs to me is that, in terms of geological time periods, this 1,000 year or 1,200 year old time period was unstable. It was unstable in terms of geological time periods.
Yeah, it was an exception. That's why connecting all the other swings to impacts is difficult, because this one is. Yeah.
So I'm thinking, like, if an impact started this the Younger Dryas period, and then there was another catastrophic event 1,200 years later. You could say that because it was so unstable already due to the impact that 12,000 years ago, you could have had some type of catastrophic event that was like volcanism
or solar.
Or it just turned the Gulf Stream back on, if that's all correct.
Yeah.
Then I'm certainly other things would have shifted back into gear too, but somehow we shifted back into gears, and that there are gears.
Right.
But if you have gears in your car and you get hit by a truck, do you shift back into? Do you ever shift again?
Right. Well, I think one of the things we've discussed.
It's a good question, guys, and y'all are digging to some of the stuff that certainly I can't explain, and I think reliably can tell you that other people can't explain as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So we'll get away from that because that's not your area of expertise. But so I want to go back to the Alaskan muck real quick. Are you saying now that you are less of a skeptic of the idea that there's lots of animals and plants buried in there, but maybe it just doesn't have anything to do with it?
I absolutely am.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And I'm more encouraged about the value of my own tusk. My skepticism was working against my pecuniary interest in that instance, right? But I love the fact that it would be part of the lore, and I love how it's in Nature. The thing got published when this stuff was really hot in the beginning in 2008 after Acapulco. They did a good article featuring my tusk in Nature, and actually had a photo of it hung in my home in Nature, for God's sakes.
That's awesome.
You can find that just Googling bullets and tusk, which do not show up much together. Bullets, tusk, Nature, bullets, tusk. And a good article in there, and it's rah, this tusks are implanted with cosmic material and stuff, and etc. And that was during the time where there was some kind of initial enthusiasm for the Younger Dryas hypothesis, but before the first meager failed efforts at replication.
Yeah. Okay, so let's shift gears a bit here and talk about the burn papers. Like you were involved in that.
Okay.
And so, what explain to people what that is, because we haven't gone over that as much on the podcast before.
Oh gosh, it's kind of been, that was the terrific part earlier this year. We're at the end of the year now. I guess it was March or so. 2 papers that the team had been working on, and I'm very, very minor part of this, but I was able to keep up with all the drafts, of course, because they share it with everyone, and I talk regularly to the lead authors. But we published 2 massive, comprehensive papers that had been in review for 5 years, gentlemen, which is just an unusually long time. You would think if something that's so comprehensive as this would, I'm actually looking to call them up here, could get published, it would get published sooner than that.
Yeah.
But it was quite a lift.
So it faced some resistance, is that the idea?
Yeah, it faced a lot of pushback from the reviewers, and appropriately so. These are controversial ideas, but it was a summary of a lot of evidence that concluded that there was an impact winter 12,800 thereabout years ago at the transition to the Younger Dryas. That not only did it get cold, but it was clear in charcoal records in lakes around the world when studied with Bayesian statistics and very sophisticated large data set analysis that something extraordinary happened in the charcoal record at that time. And that also the ice cores and glaciers showed evidence that an impact happened 12,800 years ago. So there were 2 sets of papers, one focused on ice cores and glaciers, which was not original research particularly. Our team has never gone and drilled an ice core. We've made some attempts to get at glaciers. Actually, we have gotten to the Greenland Glacier, and Paul Majewski is one of the great glaciologists in the world, gathered that data and published a platinum paper about elevated platinum in samples that we take in ourselves. But generally, this is reviewing all the ice core records that are existing. And then a whole other set of data was in another paper, and that was concerning lake, marine, and terrestrial sediments. So you got kind of the cold stuff and the earth stuff.
Okay.
And when you go back and look through the timeline of what's in that material and go back and say, okay, today is what it looks like today, and 100 years ago, here's what the material looks like, and here's what the geochemistry is, and the mix of charcoal, versus not having a burn event, et cetera. When you go back through that stratigraphy or that ice, what do you see when you look at the large data sets?
Right.
And it was very, very clear that there had been a tremendous conflagration across at least the northern hemisphere. So a burn so bad that it shows itself, with distinction versus thousands and thousands of other years since and before. And that probably 10% of the, Earth's biomass at that time was lit on fire, which is actually larger than I think some of the proposals for the comet killer for the dinosaurs.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Yeah,
that's a lot. It was a bad day.
Now,
people saw it.
Was the dating on this again associated with the beginning of the Younger Dryas period?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, the 12,800 years
absolutely.
ago.
This is all concerning the beginning.
Okay. That's just crazy.
Yeah, and these are from scientists. I'll just say the lead on the paper, was Wendy Wolbach, and she's an engineer from Purdue. Excuse me, she's not Purdue. I always think of it as engineering school. She is a scientist and a chemist from Purdue. And I just know her, as a digital acquaintance now going 10 years. But if feel comfortable still yet to meet her in person, then I know what kind of person she is. And she's not a wild claims person. In fact, she was invited to go on a podcast, and she didn't want to do it. Yeah. Not because she demurred or was coy. She just is not her style.
Right.
She is a in the lab, serious, rational chemist who doesn't go make wild claims and wild theories like perhaps I would on a podcast, right?
Well, well, the world needs both types.
That's right. Gotta have both kinds of people.
Yeah, and then the second author, Joanne Ballard, who's actually a little bit more like me, and I'd love to, y'all should have her on your podcast. She actually stepped in for Wendy and did some work, and she's built her whole career now since she got her PhD, I guess about 5 years ago, on studies around it. And I'm just looking at the paper now. Then I see the third one's Paul Majewski, and I saw him on 60 Minutes. 60 Minutes did a whole thing with Paul Majewski in the Arctic with Scott Kelly.
Oh, wow.
Right? And he was the guy speaking about what the ice tells us. It's one of the greatest living glaciologists. He appears in our papers, but we're supposed to be misinterpreting things because we think it sounds cool?
Right.
No.
Yeah. That's what we call a skirp-tard response.
There you go.
People they claim to be skeptics, but it's not actually skeptical, right? Skeptical is to question everything. These guys are actually towing the line for some kind of narrative, and so
exactly. And we see it in so many fields of inquiry. But the Younger Dryas, and the fun thing about our hypothesis is it reveals it so more clearly. The whole skirp-tard thing, more clearly than anything else. Because generally, it's very good speculation with perhaps some field evidence or past studies that indicate this or that, where wild claims may be made, but they're not published again and again and again. And we're getting dismissed like we found Bigfoot.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's like you're not putting out the Patterson Gimli film here. You guys have done a lot of work on this out in the field and in the lab and everything like that, and you have a lot of people.
And they got it in the papers. It's the work hard, play by the rules.
That's right.
You're supposed to be, that's supposed to win the day, and the internet will win the day. But there are certain people that's not good enough, and you pointed that out earlier with the moving the goalpost. And one of the classic goalposts is just to get published. To have catastrophic literature of the kind that we're talking about in human times, has been the holy grail of all catastrophes since Velikovsky.
Oh, right? Yeah, you're totally right.
So, that's what terrifies them.
Right. One of the goalposts originally was get the stuff published if you can, and now you have.
Just get the stuff published.
Now they're dragging the goalpost, no crater, then you find a crater, dragging the goalpost again. Yeah.
And that's what drove me to greater depths of cynicism in 2008. I thought I was an adult that had seen it all, and I figured, this is catastrophism that's going to be published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. Mm-hmm. Surely, people out of respect for that institution and the authors on here will not fall into line, but will handle the information responsibly.
Right.
No, The information was handled terribly irresponsible.
Yeah.
So, but we persevered, and others have confirmed us again and again. Within those papers is a great table, and I do a cutout of it that I send around sometimes on Twitter and other places. But it shows all the replications.
Right.
And they outnumber by 2 to 1 at least anything that called into question. So those papers also help put that to bed. And they haven't answered those papers, I'll note. There has been no, which is quite a compliment.
Right.
And that's what gets to what I said earlier. Even prior to Hiawatha, the papers here and the Chris Moore papers finding platinum, and I know you guys, I don't expect y'all to be familiar with the timeline of this, but there have been 2 sets of very, very strong publications in the last 2 years from the Younger Dryas team of the Comet Research Group. And both of those are obviously independent of Hiawatha. They influenced, I think, the community greatly. And I think they brought the majority, if you will, or the zeitgeist, if not publicly stated, of the scientific community that this is a very serious thing.
Right.
And I think Hiawatha has obviously put that on steroids. How it's going to show itself, I don't know.
Right.
Will there be more teams pop up with, I would think that you'd see more teams that we don't even know about now, just as happened time and time again, pop up with confirming evidence of our previous publications.
Right. So, okay. So, going back to the burn papers again, the lake part. This is the idea here is that lakes deposit sediments that are based on like whatever's in the air, the atmosphere at the time, and it's seasonal, so that you can easily. It's like stratigraphy, right? It like delineates itself by year or at least by season or something like that. So it's easy to.
That's right.
Okay. Yeah.
They call them barbs.
Oh, okay.
It's like tree rings, or exactly like you talked about.
Right.
Tree rings, archaeological soils, or I forget what you just mentioned, but yeah, that kind of process.
Right. Same as the ice cores. You can sort of like count the years, basically, almost like tree rings, because of the delineations and there's a discontinuity through the seasons based on the.
That's
change.
right.
Yeah.
And these are very, very special lakes. Right.
Yes. Oh, okay.
And you wouldn't know it necessarily looking at them. But from what I understand, there's some of them, there's one in Kentucky, for instance. I think it's called Jackson Pond, if I'm right, that actually one of the people who worked for me had done his early career work on that got published that helped support all this. And it's just an old lake in Kentucky. But some lakes have been sitting there since the Pleistocene.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
So they're very old.
And they've been in a stable enough landscape position that they've continued to accumulate sediment, not enough to extinguish the lake, but enough to record a long, long history of adding a couple of millimeters of material a year.
Yes.
Right.
Exactly.
So you go look at those couple of millimeters and you can determine things. And one of the things that jumps out, and one of the things that's always interested scientists, pro and con, our subject, is the distribution of charcoal within those lakes is one of the simpler ones. And then we even went in and looked at, I'm looking here at the paper, platinum, magnetic spherules, nano diamonds, going all the way through some of these things.
Right.
And no, excuse me, we haven't studied those materials
in the lakes yet.
Yeah, in lakes yet.
Okay.
Per se. The charcoal has been studied by others for years and years, by one member of our team, but most of the science comes from the synthesis of those records.
Okay.
And looking at them carefully. And that's pretty complex stuff. And you mentioned the term, I think, earlier, at least before we got on the podcast, about Bayesian statistical analysis.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm no expert.
Neither am I.
So, yeah. But clearly protocols were followed to move that math, and that math hasn't been answered yet.
Okay.
Remember, this all came out in Journal of Geology. I'm looking at February 2nd. So it's not been a year yet, and not so much as a peep from the other side. The other side is someone like Jennifer Marlin, who you mentioned earlier from Yale.
Right.
Who was speaking, she's a charcoal person, I believe. There's another young lady named Jacqueline Gill, who's a harsh critic of ours. I've asked her a couple of questions on Twitter, and she blocked me. How embarrassing is that, right? And Okay, but highly, she's very highly political, and I think has other agendas. Jennifer Marlin, I'm not sure, but we saw Jennifer Marlin pop up. She's an expert in charcoal, I believe, and she popped up telling us that she didn't think a 20-mile wide crater could affect North America's climate.
Right. Or set everything on fire. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
So, yeah, this paper undermined a lot of their criticism of the distribution of charcoal and the indications of burning. Our conclusion was, I probably shouldn't state it that way again because I'm not speaking for the team, but the conclusion of the paper that I was on was that there was a worldwide conflagration at that time, and it was well published in the Journal of Geology.
Right, and that just helps the cooling, right? You have worldwide fires, and it's throwing up stuff in the air, and you end up with what we call a nuclear winter, which is it's an impact winter, right? Like you said.
That's right.
Yeah.
And all of modern science, going back to concern about literal nuclear bomb winter, indicates that's more easily accomplished getting particles in the air than you might intuitively think. Right.
Yeah.
That it doesn't take a lot. Like Mount Pinatubo. We've seen it happen in our own lifetimes. You get one volcano that we might not even noticed 100 years ago, but it noticeably changed temperature. When you put those particles in the air, it makes a big damn difference. If you light a tenth of the world on fire, plus toss up enough stuff that at least produced one 20-mile smoking crater, you're going to have a dark period.
Right. Yeah. And it reflects a lot of the sunlight back out into space. Yeah. That's basically what it does, right?
And it probably had horrible acid rains. Joanne Ballard, who's on that paper as well, I spoke of, the #2 author in Tennessee. Yeah, she's done work that suggests that it actually, you can find some mammoth tusks, get back to the pieces and parts that were degraded, and actually kind of burned and acidified, right?
Yeah, and I know Randall Carlson talks about, he thinks that the Loess may be mud rains, basically, from these same kind of impact events. Yeah, because it has this vertical structure that is difficult to explain with wind deposit. So,
but then you find generations of that, you get back to where there are multiple impacts.
Right.
It's kind of where I am on that, Yeah. So it kind of takes you another leap.
Which, when you go back around and think, if this stuff is cyclical and we get into bombardment phases, the Carlson talks about this a little bit too. Like, we may pass into an area where we may get into an area of the Torrid's commentary stream where it's basically we're in a phase where we get bombarded all the time by large, not enormous objects like what caused the Hiawatha crater, but smaller ones that explode in the air, and ones that may make it all the way to the ground. But you could get, like, and I know you've written about this on your blog. You have something that comes down and blows up in the air. It can drastically affect the ground. Like the idea of the steam explosions is very, very strange and interesting. So,
Bill Napier is kind of my go-to guy on the Torrents because he is the kind of the father of all of that,
right?
With Victor Klube, and did a wonderful book in 1980, and then a follow-up book, and I guess the best you can say for his critics is they ignored him. They never took him down. They didn't even go after him. They just ignored him, and the Americans basically ignored him. And you call that school of astronomers who were, British employees, of the crown.
Right.
You call those the British neo-catastrophists. And they were the prevailing school of thought, and to some degree are still in England, that think that these impacts happen much more frequently. Yeah. On the much more conservative side that won the day with regard to impact frequency is the crowd at NASA.
Yeah.
Right? And those were the folks that were responsible for determining impact frequency. And they've always had an awkward job, fellas. And their job, and they never really truly address it. You go look at people like Clark Chapman and Alan Harris. These gentlemen are getting older now, but they were big names in the day. And David Morrison, who were the go-to guys for impact frequency and is it a danger for our lifetimes for the last 30 years, right?
Yeah.
When they would get into an article, or there'd be some near pass of an asteroid, and they'd call one of those gentlemen and ask them, that they would say they'd had two messages. Is one, we don't really know. There's much we don't know. We need more money to study it. This is a critical thing, but it's not that damn important.
Right, it's not very important, but we need more money.
They would both quell fears and insist that it was a threat.
Right.
The degree that they needed more money, is a very weird position. Yeah. And I guess it's like, and And I've always noticed, I think it's the inverse, if you will, of global warming scientists.
Yeah.
Yep.
That the impact frequency crowd, if you will, are paid to, and their bosses expect them to answer the phone and say my problem isn't that big of a problem.
Right.
There's a whole nother raft of people, about literally a couple of thousand times more scientists, right, that are responsible for communicating global warming science.
Yeah.
And caution is not the first thing that comes out of their mind.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. It is. This is cause for immediate alarm today.
Right.
For you, your family.
Yeah.
And right or wrong, that's the message. And I think everybody would agree some elements of that community overplay it, if you will.
Yep.
But you don't see any elements of the impact frequency community overplaying it. What you do is you have some very quiet, responsible English scientists who actually proved it's a very, very serious threat.
Right. My favorite thing that NASA has said about this is that, that they have found 90% of all threatening objects in space. And I'm like, if you haven't found 100% of them, how do you know what 90% of them is?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, absolutely.
How can you decide that you found 90%?
Well put. Alan West reminded me the other day, I didn't know it was this comprehensive, but the concern that the impact, let's say Bill Napier, worth Googling again, and his concern over the Tard meteor stream, it doesn't have anything to do with the asteroids they're looking for.
Right.
Right? It has to do with the chance that you could run into something in the Tard stream, but you could also have another interloper come in.
Yes.
Right? Which is a disintegrating comet that you have absolutely you cannot predict that.
Right.
You can't go and say well, you can with some, but you can also have very new ones. But
even an interloper that contacted the Taurus meteor stream and rearranged the directions of the objects in the meteor stream.
Right, something that passes through the Taurids way far away from us and changes a whole bunch of things. Yeah.
Yeah. And Bill put it to me that, it's like crossing a highway, that depending on the time of day, you can walk across that highway reliably time and time again. But there are certain times where the traffic is much higher. Right. When you look at the guys that do it there at NASA, they don't consider the higher traffic periods. They do it as a steady state analysis based on, what we have right now. Right. Is my understanding.
Yes.
Right. And like Comet Enki, you got some large object.
Created the torts.
Yeah, you got some large object that comes in and it starts to break up, and all the modeling that they've done on this shows that you end up with areas with high traffic basically, and then other areas where there's almost nothing. Right. The Taurids. That's right. The Taurids, when we pass through it, might give us a meteor shower, but one day it's going to give us impacts. Because
that's a fascinating part of it. That if it was associated with the Taurids, which clearly clearly in my mind caused the Tunguska impact. Yeah. That we do experience it. Right. That we got a little taste of it every year.
Right. Exactly. Right. And the Chelyabinsk thing.
Absolutely. Well, no, that's February 15th.
Oh, okay. That wasn't Taurus.
So it didn't line up with this.
It did come right out of the sun, though. Nobody saw it.
That's right. A lot of different ways it can happen. Yeah. And one thing and I'm not sure, but the other day that one of the researchers was telling me that, but Bill and those guys they think all the large impacts toward Earth were caused by comets, that there weren't any free-floating iron asteroids disassociated from the asteroid belt that come in. And that's very important for Hiawatha. And I guess I should add that the early speculation within some parts of some of the people I'm talking to is that it wasn't just an iron asteroid, and that God bless the folks that are researching it, and I'm sure their mind is completely open, but their initial take that this was a freestanding single chunk of iron that came in, they believe differently, that it was probably a more of a cometary object in some stage of breakup in which the material contained obviously large iron masses.
Right. That's what we were talking about. And it could have been and it could have been a much larger object that there was a big iron ball inside of that created the Hiawatha crater, and other places impacted something else. It could be any number of scenarios, like you were saying.
Yeah, and the port they're looking at it as a one bullet when it might have been a shotgun.
Right. Exactly. Yes.
And you just found one BB.
Right.
And part of the shot, so to speak, in other areas could have been chunks of ice.
Right.
As opposed to
chunks of dirty cometary
ice. That's right. And it could have been chunks of ice that hit chunks of ice.
Exactly.
Yes.
That hit bigger chunks of ice.
Right.
Or it could have just hit the water. For years, I've been terrified that they would find it's kind of fun now. You can imagine the fun of this, that you look forward, your wildest dream as a YDB researcher in the last 20 years was that you're going to find a big smoking crater somewhere on Earth, right?
Right.
And they find one, but what I was worried about is it would be in one of the 3/4 of the world that's wet.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. Yeah.
So they're probably still out there. I'm just glad that at least one big piece, if it does date to our time,
hit land.
At least one big, hit land and can be seen. But damn if it wasn't a close run thing.
Right.
Because of course only half of it shows.
Yeah.
It could have been deep under there. I guess they would have still found it.
Yeah.
I don't think any visual observation of the fact that it revealed half itself by a wath and you can see half of the ice, you can actually see the semicircle.
Right.
I don't think that tipped them off. Interesting.
Well, they have been finding like the Burkle crater is a pretty recent.
That's right.
And they don't think that happened very long ago either. And that's under, what is it, 2 miles of the Indian Ocean? That's an enormous.
It is, but that's very speculative,
right?
But God bless them for speculating, and those are great scientists. One of them, Dallas Abbott, they're in that same lab at Columbia that Wally Broker runs, right?
Right.
So she's thinking the right things, and she's in the right place. But they've been less field intensive, but their speculation was totally legitimate, and their hypothesis that within the Holocene itself, there would have been other instances. For instance, sometimes people will tie this stuff to the biblical stories of flood, which is fine, and far be it from me to dismiss that out of hand. But there was clearly another event 8,000 years ago, dramatic climate event, a dramatic meltwater pulse, and all of that.
Yes.
I wouldn't think that if you'd had 2 of these, a betting man would say, if you're still telling the campfire story about the big flood, it would have come from the previous big flood.
Right. Because everybody who knew about that one died.
Or maybe maybe they passed on some things, and the guys that came out of the 8,000 flood were still talking about the 13,000 or whatever.
Right.
But I think the biblical stuff happened something more recently, and that's what that Holocene Impact Working Group was focusing on.
Well, one of the things that really blew my mind when I first heard about this Burkle crater thing or whatever, I went to go look at the coastlines around there, like Madagascar, and then man, you can see enormous what looked like wave basically runoff.
Deposits.
Deposits all the way over in Australia too. You can see them in Australia. On the other side of that ocean, 4,000 miles away. And then the deposit.
That's a hell of a rat hole to run down.
That's right.
That's a great. I've looked at all that same stuff. It's amazing.
Yeah.
The problem is that they were never. First of all, they were never adequately refuted, but only because they never adequately published.
Right. Yep.
Right. They had some bits and pieces and some presentations and some interesting. They had a great site in New York that's one of those old lakes that collects the barbs that you can go test through time, the sediment in the bottom of the lake.
Yeah.
And Dallas Abbott had in there plankton from the Caribbean.
Oh my God.
And you're up there in upstate New York and you're testing a bog. It was called White Bog, I believe, whatever. But you go back down there and you find plankton, from the Caribbean. I guess it was her thing, Burkle crater time 5,200 years ago or so.
Right, exactly, yeah.
That's a hell of a finding, but they needed to kind of do more.
Right.
But it's hard, the Younger Dryas team came together. There have been many attempts to prove this stuff with individual shot papers. Our team came together with a certain chemistry and mix and a certain leading lights, intellectual lights, that they were able to keep pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing.
Right.
So there's other stuff out there, and if we had enough time and money and people thinking like we're thinking, gosh knows, you'd love to go look at more recent times and say what else could have happened. And there's plenty of reason to believe. Marie Agnes Corti, who is a soil scientist of some note in France, has maintained for years that the Middle Age collapse, the collapse of the Bronze Age civilizations in Mesopotamia and the Levant, etc., was all due to the catastrophe, 3,700 years ago.
Right.
Yeah.
And you have all the Bronze Age forts in Scotland and Ireland and in England that have vitrified stones all over them too, like implying some great heat was applied to all those Bronze Age forts and the civilizations collapsed. So that's all interesting stuff.
And I would like to think all of this got back on the table to some degree. At least it should take a big step up the credibility range, because now we have found at least one crater.
Yes.
That happened. People saw that happen. Right. That wasn't a dinosaur that saw that coming down.
And it's still smoking. I'm going to keep saying that.
Yeah. I won't say we hope. I can say we hope. See, I have absolutely no scientific, if you're a regular, credentialed scientist could not say he hopes.
Right.
But the Tusk feels free saying I hope.
All right, you had the.
That's cool. I wanted to ask you, just change gears a little bit, about Alan West and looking at it. When I first started looking into this whole thing in the Comet Research Group, and I was looking at the names and of the scientists and doing a little research on each one of them, I ran across this sort of scandal. It appeared to be with Alan West, and immediately, in my mind, I wanted to assume that this was
ad hominem attacks.
Yes, ad hominem attacks on the guy,
on the guy's character.
And I can't remember exactly, but can you fill us in on what was going on there with all that?
Sure. I'm actually seeing whether the website that was published on is still in business, because I'm not getting a link right now. I think it went down.
Oh, well, that's
great.
Yeah.
Well, that'd be my first commentary on that piece of junk. But no, it was a hit job. It was a total smear. And what they did was kind of lace together two facts that were, somewhat easily discoverable, and then, extenuated that to there being, some kind of nefarious characters who were seeking to salt geochemical ice cores with signs of catastrophe.
Oh my God.
That you would actually have fraud involved here. Okay. And that took the form of, they called it Miller McCune. I'm just looking at it here, but I've got a good blog on it. You can find it's called, the title of it was Alan West Smeared by Dalton, Former Nature Writer. And what happened was kind of the first article after we made the Acapulco presentations presenting the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. One of the first very prominent articles was written in Nature by a fellow named Rex Dalton. Dalton did a fairly rah-rah article in one of the main science publications in the world, said this could be a tremendous discovery of worldwide importance.
Yeah.
Well, then the skepticism machine kicks in, and he started backpedaling very, very quickly. To the point of he felt he had put himself at risk and brought some disrepute to himself by even supporting this, is what I speculate, etc. Then became an intense critic, at least behind the scenes. He didn't publish much, I guess. He lost his job at Nature.
Oh.
And I forget what kind of, speculation there was about that. But he lost his job at Nature. Then he popped up on this thing called the Pacific Standard and published a piece that was highly sourced by Mark Boslow, the absolute continuous critic of the hypothesis, who's been around since the beginning and never misses a chance to say that it's all fraudulent, etc. Accused one of the dearest people I've ever met in my life, and certainly the smartest person I have ever had the privilege to meet, Alan West, who's one of the lead authors, discovered that and misrepresented as a criminal offense that Alan was involved in a court case in California where he was ultimately fined, later expunged. What was the dollar amount? $3,000, $4,500 by the California, I guess the court, for a licensure problem. In other words, he is a licensed hydrologist in Arizona where he lives and does his work. apparently Alan went to California, wrote some hydrology reports in a high-profile California or local, but when I say contentious water fight, did a study for them. Within those court cases, was accused of not being properly licensed to provide information in that water fight.
Oh my God!
As some of the slime that got thrown in the water fight, they accused him of not being credentialed, and as part of that, he got fined. I mean, come on, man.
Yeah.
And not
That's
only
like,
that,
okay.
so it's the context in which these allegations or whatever were presented in the research that I did, just looking into the guy's name, were based on that he was a discredited,
hydrologist or whatever
person or whatever, and associated. I'm just like, what?
Yeah.
Come on.
Well, no, it's like getting a plumbing license or a hair salon license. If you go cut hair, if I at my local, the guy who cuts my hair, if he went over to Tennessee and cut somebody's hair, he could get fined.
Yeah.
It'd probably be about the same. It's probably a $5,000 fine. Those things are serious, right?
Right.
It's always a question, particularly with people who do consulting work in geoscience, is exactly what constitutes a licensable offering to the client.
Right.
If I write up a thing, I mean, with engineers, it's a stamp. I'm sure it wasn't a stamp kind of thing. But one way or another, within the court case, he was on the side, was very aggressive lawyers that included him as an appropriately licensed expert who had provided information within the thing. So it was a misdemeanor. It was a $4,500 fine, and Mark Boslow and others continue to refer to him as a criminal.
Oh,
Yeah,
gosh.
exactly.
And then a lead author in our group is a criminal because of a licensure that was expunged completely.
Yeah.
Alan went back and got it completely expunged. And then I'll go ahead and talk about the other part that caught my eye probably more than that, because I get that. I mean, I'm in a business where, I've been fined before for things that you could call me environmental, you could call me a polluter because I've had sediment violations in my business.
Right.
Well, I'm also in the wetland restoration business and have, restored 100,000 acres of wetlands, all right?
Right.
We have polluted at times. In the course of business, sometimes you get fined.
Yeah.
My point there. The other part was that he had misrepresented himself by having changed his name to West from Witt, right? Now, I'm not exactly sure if you're trying to hide yourself while you go publish scientific papers. Okay, usually criminals try to lower their profile.
Yeah, their public profile, yeah.
What happened was, Alan had long wanted to write a book. He wrote a book, parts of which they regret today because, it threw the whole kitchen sink in 2005. And frankly, he told me he'd never really liked his original name, Witt. He didn't like Alan Witt. And he always liked the guy in that old cowboy show from the 70s, Alan West.
Yeah.
And he's about to do a book, and he changed his name.
Yeah. Nothing wrong with that.
Yep, and many authors have done the same thing.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah, I know.
So, all right.
And Alan, if you're going to change your name, you're not a secret guy. I would bet 80% of the time I've ever called the guy the exact same number he picks up. He ain't hiding. This is not a man of mystery. And they do treat it. They'll say, I've seen things of it. They'll call it, the cryptic or the mysterious or the low profile Alan West. Well, he's only low profile because he doesn't tweet every 10 minutes.
Oh yeah. It's low profile.
Yeah, he's an old school private sector, polymath geologist and earth scientist who spends his time writing detailed papers instead of smearing people. And all of this was fed by Mark Boslow to this guy, Dalton, who was trying to get a new job. And part of his new job was coming out against something that he probably felt he had been too enthusiastic about at first.
Man.
Does that help, guys?
That definitely does. Thank you for setting the record straight.
Setting the record
Brothers
straight.
of the Serpent Podcast.
That's right.
Well, I didn't do as good a job as perhaps I could have, but I hope I got the spirit of the smear across to you.
Yeah. No.
And honestly, that is, I don't want to admit that I jumped to a conclusion, but that was what I did because I've seen that type of smearing.
Yeah.
It's another fallacy. It's a way to redirect attention away from the data to some other
Right. When you can't address the data, you attack the character of the person who's presenting the data.
Yeah.
It's
classic. That was in 2011 when that smear came out. Just 2 years later, Harvard found a 1,000 times crustal abundance background platinum spike in the Greenland ice core 12,900 years ago, right?
Right. Yeah.
I wrote a blog then that said, what did Alan do? Is Alan such a nefarious character, this man who changed his name and had a licensure violation in California, that he snuck up to Cambridge, Massachusetts, went into the ice lab, and managed to salt the platinum into the core?
Yeah. Where's he getting the platinum from?
What the hell, man? If he's a fraud, he's a lucky fraud.
Yeah.
It'd be like Bernie Madoff accidentally buying the right stock. How can you claim that other people could create the same results as the fraud does at Harvard?
Yeah.
Excuse me, I'm getting a little hyperbolic.
No, man.
No, thank you.
You got sweat drops. I get sweat drops on this stuff too, man. I start shouting.
I knew I'd enjoy this podcast because I wanted to get a little more hyperbolic because, because of the crater discovery.
Yeah, exactly. Damn it! It's awesome.
We're in new territory.
That's right.
Pump it up.
That's right. Where's the party at? Dang it.
Well, all right. We also wanted to get into the Carolina Bays, but I know we're coming up on another hour here. Do you would you like to go into that or
a little bit, or you got to go? Either way, man.
Can I I'll do it, but give me a break. I need about 5 minutes.
Yeah, no problem.
Not a problem. We'll take another snake break and come back with the Tusk.
The Tusk.
Okay.
On the Carolina Bays.
Yeah. Brothers of the Serpent podcast, having a fantastic conversation about all things Younger Dryas. Stuff that we have talked about many times on the podcast before, but we are getting the serious information. This is like, this guy has gone into it far, far more deep than we ever have, and he knows a lot more than we do about this. So this is a great conversation. So we are back with Mr. George Howard, and we're going to talk to him about the Carolina Bays, right? You've done a lot of research on that.
I am. It's kind of how I got into the larger subject, for better or worse.
Right.
Yeah, what do you want to hear? I guess I could give it kind of from the personal perspective because it, there's a timeline to it.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
go for that.
The Carolina Bays, let me go ahead and define it now as what I call, for better or worse, the only analogy I can come up with is kind of the kooky caboose of the greater theory, okay? And I'm going to give your listeners, some credit for probably hearing you talk about them before, but a brief explanation would be that it's a series of aligned, very, very subtle depressions that are elliptical that tend to point more westerly when more northerly on the eastern seaboard and more northerly when more southerly on the eastern seaboard. So they align in a radial pattern across multiple states and 55 or 60,000 different instances. And, for years they actually said 500,000, but they were never that high. So even our group, which is not necessarily at all the Younger Dryas boundary group, but the people who follow bays, we defined it down to 55,000 not long ago.
Oh, okay.
And so that series of elliptical depressions has puzzled people since the 1930s, where it became a subject of intense interest by scientists all over the country. And it was a tremendous controversy through the 30s and early 40s. And the controversy took the form around, it was kind of important to talk about the timing. That was right around when they finally proved that Barringer Crater, the meteor crater outside of Flagstaff, Arizona, was actually a impact crater.
Right.
And prior to that, had been thought to have maybe been a volcano, et cetera. And they finally put that to bed. So there was some kind of, general recognition that things come from space and explode. And around the same time, coincidentally, they came back with aerial photographs as part of a Roosevelt New Deal administration effort, and it revealed these new technology of aerial photography revealed that the southeastern coastal plain was absolutely littered with these very subtle but clearly visible from above oval depressions. And again, from the ground, you would never know what you're dealing with. You might have just some general sense that the swamp that you're looking at or the low area that you're walking around has a circular form, but you would never know how one after another into the thousands all seem to conspire to point the same direction, but also differ in their size from 6 or 7 miles long all the way down to things as small as 400 feet. And they all have that repeating pattern again and again, with very, very, very few of them being lakes, and the vast majority being dry. Many of those will have vegetation that'll show them to you, and then more of them are ghost bays, as we call them, where you can just see them in fields that have now been turned under, made into crops, etc.
Right.
So you've got these repeating patterns in the landscape. It was speculated even as far back ago as then, or it was immediately speculated that they were impact craters, and that was immediately undermined by the fact that you found no meteorites or any kind of meteoritic material or any kind of impact material or debris within the bays
or crater
themselves.
structure, right? No crater structure either. Yeah,
that's right. And you don't have a traditional crater structure,
right?
And starting kind of, I guess, in the early 50s, they rewrote the hypothesis, which I think is entirely fair, and said, well, could this have been a secondary effect of some sort, or possibly a shock wave, which is kind of advanced thinking, because then later one of our chief critics, Mark Boslow, proved, I suppose, or at least was involved in the science that said that things could explode in the air with tremendous consequences on the ground, but leave no material.
Right.
So they were thinking that way in the early 50s, and did the rock blow up just above but never made it to the ground? But that's not particularly satisfying. Then in the 70s, a team published, after it was long trashed and ruined people's career, the chair of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill's Department of Geology, William Prouty, literally died with a pen in his hand responding to his critics.
Oh, wow.
And he was chair of the department, and he was a career-long advocate and publishing proponent that they were all caused at once from above.
Right.
I still agree with that.
Yeah, yes. I like that generalization for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And how it was caused, who knows? We can speculate, and that's what we're about to do.
Yeah.
But the other explanation is they were not caused all at once from above, but that they were caused by winds which blew shallow depressions in the ground into perfectly oval lakes. Today, at least, the thinking is over at least 4 periods of formation that reach back more than 100,000 years, with some of them separated by 10 and 20,000 years each. And that each time these winds came back, those winds conspired to produce more and more bays that point the same direction. Okay? And that the modern thinking is, as you call them, the terrestrial and extraterrestrial, had nothing to do with aliens, but from space.
Right.
Those two camps of causation, the terrestrialists are settled today, and they've resettled themselves often on this stuff, but settled today that they were all lakes. And we've got evidence, I have evidence that undermines that. It is a sensitive subject for the Younger Dryas boundary hypothesis because it's not needed. And when you're in a very, very difficult publishing and informational challenge like this group is, you certainly don't retain evidence that you consider to still be questionable.
Yes.
Right.
And with a large team, you're going to have a variety of opinions on how questionable that evidence is. And in fact, even I would agree today that there is absolutely no need to include the bays in the hypothesis.
Right.
They were included as sites in the first paper, which is still considered valid by even the skeptics within our own group concerning their sudden formation and simultaneous formation. Those who are skeptical of it within our also support the fact there appeared to be materials that were created in the catastrophe. But did the bays precede them? Were they sitting there as lakes and stuff drops out in them and now you can find that? That would probably be some of those folks thinking, not to speak for them.
Right.
Okay. So we uncoupled that theory, if you will. And this is all in an informal manner, but in an informal manner. But we decoupled that theory from the greater theory that something happened 12,900 years ago.
Right.
So you don't see it in any of the modern papers, but it will continue to be associated with, and in some people's minds, haunt the greater hypothesis because it is so tremendously speculative.
Yeah.
And in fact, has been entirely dismissed by scientists that I admire greatly that we're associated with in the research, have written papers within the last few years entirely dismissing the bays as being formed simultaneously. So the Younger Dryas hypothesis gets tied to the Carolina bays with some justification because it played a role in the early papers.
Right.
It played a role in the early thinking of Dr. Firestone and Dr. West. Some of them remain curious and feel like the explanations even others in our team have given could be strengthened in the future, although people have tried to put it to bed. But I find, some of the recent speculation by other people who have published to be somewhat compelling. I also find the recent dismissals of their simultaneous causation that was published to be inadequate based on its failure to explain the alignment adequately.
Right.
Yeah, that I believe that if they were correct, and there were several periods, some of these being, maybe 3,000 to 5,000 years old or long, where, as they call them, the katabatic winds that swept down from the glaciers, during different ice ages. These winds came in and blew this fan of depressions out in the southeast. Okay, I got you. I got it. Maybe wind created them once, but if it created them 4 times, you should be able to go and say this bay was created in class 2.
Right.
This one is a class 3 bay. This is a class 1, because for either from dating reasons or from their orientation, we can see that they're same thing happening in different periods.
Right.
But to my eye and to anyone that looks at them, the bays are entirely uniform and don't exhibit themselves as any being older or younger, perhaps more deformed than one or another.
Right.
But they don't show genetic classes of formation, in my opinion.
The only way that any of them look younger than any of the other ones is immediately younger because it landed in a big one or whatever.
Maybe. And the other side actually give those multiple datings in multiple ringed bays, of which those things are an absolute puzzle to anybody that looks at them.
Yeah.
They're saying this bay formed this right away, then another set of wind came and moved it out to here, and we test this, and I think there's some problems with that dating. I think it's speculative. And then the next bay rim dated to this date. Therefore, there were 3 ages.
Right.
Well, that's one multi-rim bay. Go find me an individual bay nearby or far away and say, okay, this individual bay that only formed one rim, it was formed 72,000 years ago.
Right.
Or 75 to 70,000 years ago. And this other one was formed during the recent, during the Younger Dryas, because some of them date to 12,000. This one was formed 15,000 to 13,000 years ago.
Right.
I don't think they would point exactly the same direction. I don't think that those different periods of wind would conspire to be so exact, nor reform the former class to emulate their direction without leaving a remnant of their former orientation.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, and at the very least, the glaciers themselves, having receded and then proceeded and receded, would be different, and the winds coming off them would be different because the glaciers are totally different. Like, if they're source of the winds,
I think they took their dating too far with the classes part. But let's say they're wrong about the classes and it wasn't times, but they're right that there was one period of wind within some discrete span of time.
Okay.
That formed them. Okay, well, what then formed them? They would maintain that each and every one of them, if I read it correctly, was a lake.
Right.
And that lake, if you blow wind across a lake, it'll form itself into a perfect oval given those kinds of soils. Okay. A lot of that was both claimed and dismissed, in my opinion, years ago by studying other lakes, for instance, in Chile, and aligned lakes on the North Slope, right?
Right.
There are winds that align lakes in the world. No one questions that. But I've been to the North Slope twice in my lifetime, walked up to the lakes they claim are analogies for bays, and they're not Carolina bays.
Right.
And I get it, it's permafrost, but they're actually deeper than Carolina bays. They're more dramatic, and they had to dig their ass into permafrost. Right? Okay, and they're not ellipses by far. They're long stretched out things with rounded ends, etc. These things, you don't find this phenomena in this form anywhere on the earth.
Right.
And to say that it would happen 4 separate times, but let's say it all happened at once, and they're aligned lakes. Well, early in this, before it was dropped for good reason as a inference of our research that they may have been connected to the Younger Dryas event, we cored them in North Carolina. These just kind of crude techniques and pretty damn labor intensive. Me and some others, directed by some of the senior scientists, them involved in the field too at times, took some pretty deep cores from the bays, and all of that material was shipped, a lot of it at my personal expense, out to California, to the University of Santa Barbara, to Jim Kennett, the member of the National Academy of Sciences that I mentioned earlier, his lab out there. And his grad students or whomever went through the material in the fine detail that those kinds of scientists do.
Yeah.
Paleoclimatologists. They found no indication whatsoever in any of the sand column in a particular Carolina bay that we studied intensively that I think that you'd find the same result again and again, but we don't have that data. But that bay was never a lake. There's no question about that.
Okay.
It didn't have an organic layer. It didn't have and you can see bays that look just like that again and again and again in the landscape. That bay was, to put this completely to bed for me, and I know it's speculative stuff, and I know it even hurts the grander hypothesis, but I'm not satisfied that they have proven that bay was a lake to me.
Right. And
as long as they maintain that all bays were lakes, I'm not there.
Right.
But I'm very, very sensitive to the fact that the public and the interested scientifically minded public like yourselves that are going out and look at this stuff, throw it all in together, because it did have a relationship. Right. And damn if it isn't interesting stuff. And I really fault the critics for dismissing the public's interest in this, because I'm the public, I include myself in the public, kind of a veteran public at this point. That when you discover the Carolina bays, you make an intuitive association. You go, Jesus Christ, something happened.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And it happened all at once.
Right.
That is continuously dismissed. And I think it's a great example of almost kind of a wisdom of the crowds thing going on.
So can I ask you,
go ahead.
Didn't they find some to the west? Out in the west as well.
Oh, hell yeah.
Okay, so
in Kansas and Nebraska that point exactly to the same areas.
So we had looked at some images online that show these,
the convergence of lines of the axes.
Right, that converge somewhere around the Great Lakes.
If you adjust
Saginaw Bay.
Right, Saginaw Bay, if you adjust for rotation of the earth, for ballistic periods,
And poor Michael Davies, who's done all that work, is an interesting character and a good friend, and we differ entirely politically. Good Facebook friends, but God, we go at it sometimes. but Davies, who has seized on that. One of the good things about being an original Carolina Bay nut, because what happened was I got into this. I'm in the wetland restoration business.
Right.
And I've been involved with wetland policy since I worked in the U.S. Senate.
Right.
You mind if I tell the story? Because it's kind of
Please do.
No, go for it, yeah.
Okay, the way I discovered the Carolina Bays is that I was the wetland guy in the Senate. Now, other people were doing things like the Department of Defense and, telecom and whatnot. I was like the wetland guy. But I was the wetland guy.
Real important guy.
Yeah, the wetland guy, wetland policy. I continue to live in that world. Okay, so you see wetlands described. They'll say bogs, fens, winter wet woods, palustrine forests, Carolina bays, something. I go, Carolina Bay? And I'm like the wetland guy. I'm like, there is this wetland named after my state. What the hell are they talking about, right? But in 1992, you had to go down to the library to figure that out, and I wasn't going to do that. So I always Carolina Bay, and I'm like, is this like a bay feature? Is this like something on our coast where ships can pull into this bay? What is this bay, right? So I'm sitting there with the boss one day, the U.S. Senator, and he says, "Hey, get a map of my farm." And I said, "Yeah, we'll get a map. What do you want?" He goes, "Get me a 7.5, 20,000 to 1 USGS quad sheet." And I know well what that stuff is these days. I haven't gone into business around this stuff. But I know, I was like, USGS? He goes, "Yeah, just call up that damn geography people." He's very rough. Pig farmer, right? I'm going to start trying to imitate him in a moment. He goes, "Yeah, call them up. Call up damn bureaucrat. They'll bring a map by." So I called up the United States Geological Service and said, "Hey, my boss wants a map of his farm in Sampson County, North Carolina. Could y'all possibly get me one of these things?" And they're like, "Hell yeah, Yeah. So a courier comes over that afternoon and brings him a quad sheet of his farm. And quad sheets cover, I forget, 5 miles by 2 miles or whatever. So he rolls out the quad sheet. He's wanting to see something about this farm. We're in his office, and I look down at the thing, and splayed all across his farm were all these green dotted ellipses. And he was looking at some road or something like that. I said, hey, boss, what are these stuff? What are all these damn circles on your farm? He goes, "Meteor holes." And I said, "Meteor holes? Really, Senator?" And I was a science geek that never came into play in the business up there, right?
Yeah.
But I was a science geek. And I'm like, "Senator, I am a science geek. As far as I am aware, there are no recorded instances of any craters from space rocks in North Carolina." He goes, "Oh, that's a bunch of bullshit. Oh, no, they're all over the fucking place." Okay, because he cursed, he's a big cusser.
Yeah.
And I was like, "Really?" He goes, "Oh, yeah. Oh, now they call them Carolina Bays." And I said, "Really? That's what those wetlands are? Really? So those are all depressions in the ground?" He goes, "Oh, yeah." He goes, "Yeah, when I was a boy, it was the biggest thing, man, that everybody was all interested in our little redneck county because we had all the damn meteor holes." And then I later came to discover that in 1935, when he was a boy, on the cover of Harper's Bazaar, which was a very popular publication at the time, was an article by Edna Muldrow, still remember her name, called "The Comet That Hit the Carolinas." And if you were a 10-year-old boy in 1935 and the #1 news magazine in the country, or one of them, showed you something that said that a comet hit your thing, you'd remember that, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And he did. So I walked out of there, blah, blah, blah. Literally within a week or two, the internet guy, I was the first person, not tech guy, in my office, and I think the U.S. Senate, to demand the internet. Like, I got the internet hooked up to my machine. And I mean, it's like 93, real early. And I think it was the first thing I typed in was Carolina Bay, to get some pictures of, because I was too lazy to go to the library. And
Library of Congress right there.
Yeah, great web page. There you go, bud. Exactly. I was really, really lazy. So a web page popped up that's still out there, mostly in its same form, by a guy named Bob Cobras down at the University of Georgia. He was the first digital librarian down there, and he had able to do HTML like in 1990, and he put up a thing with a bunch of information about the bays. And I discovered that since the 1930s, that scientists had been claiming, to varying degrees of enthusiasm and to varying degrees of criticism, mostly harsh, that something happened from above in the Carolinas. So let's fast forward to 2001. I was out of the Senate. I'd come home. I'd started a business. And my very first site that I restored as a wetland happened to be a Carolina Bay, which I loved. So I was all out in this thing and digging in it with a backhoe. And this was before I met the rest of the team. So in 2000, well, then I started God, I'm going on too long with this, but
no, we love it.
It's the full story of the Carolina Bays, at least with me.
Yeah, it's great.
Okay. So then I had a buddy that had gone back to Carolina to finish up his degree some years after he should have, right? And he was taking a couple of classes to round things out and to get it. And he's taking this geology class, and he said, George, you keep talking about these Carolina Bay things, and they came from space. It's actually a subject in my geology class at Carolina to write a paper on the Carolina Bays. Could you put together some notes for me?
Okay.
And I said, yeah, I'll write you a paper. I wrote a 27-page paper, right? He turned it in. He got a B+. All
right. Hey, not bad. The guy not even in the class.
It's probably the best grade I ever got at a paper at Carolina. And it wasn't even my paper. So he gets a B+. And it's like 98. And I had bought my domain, georgehoward.net. And there was no Facebook or all this stuff. And I'm an extrovert, at least on the internet, So I said, well, shoot, I got to have something to put on georgehoward.net. So I hoisted the 27-page paper in 98 to georgehoward.net. And I continue to reign in the Google results to this day. My name became inextricably linked with the geological feature.
Yeah.
Because my paper was full of rank speculation that they were all caused at once, and that indeed they may have timed with this period that at that time was less studied, but people were aware of it, the Younger Dryas.
Right.
Wow.
And said maybe this was connected to this cataclysm. So in 2000, I get I get a couple of emails from this guy, William Topping, that says, I'm an archaeologist in Michigan. I'm digging through my site called the Gainey site up here, and I believe I found anomalous materials that suggest something cosmic occurred during the Clovis time. And I'll just riff here, and I'm a complete nut, right? This guy was a really, really complete nut. Okay, certifiable and clearly a genius. At the same time, he was pestering Richard Firestone. Okay, so I didn't pay much attention to Toppy. Maybe actually, and then I get this email that said, "This is Dr. Richard Firestone." And I look at his address, and it's 1 Cyclotron Drive, Berkeley, California. So I was like, okay, I'm going to pay attention to this guy, right? And he says, yeah, me and Toppy were surprised to find on the internet, we were looking around, we think we found evidence for a cataclysm. He's kind of a nut, but he's got some points. And he thinks he's found, and I'm now intending to agree, that there might be geochemical evidence for a cataclysm 13,000 years ago. We Googled or AltaVista'd or whatever the hell it was. It was pre-Google. And we found your paper where you say that researchers have claimed for 70 years that maybe something happened 13,000 years ago. Could we collaborate some? So that got me in touch with Firestone.
Wow.
Dude, that's
it was
nuts.
2000. Right. So I kind of started the very beginning of this because that was just those two talking.
Yeah.
Then I kind of came in, and then they published a paper in 2001 that had some flaws in it that didn't get a lot of traction. And then Kennett and West and others came in 2004 and said, hey, Firestone, can we help bring this thing back to life and get it back on, the publishing docket?
Yeah.
And we've got some interesting ideas, just like Topping did, and you supported with your instruments, that you can go, and this was the genius of it,
right,
that you can go to well-dated sites where you're not going to have to argue about whether it's dated correctly, right? It's kind of a hack. It's a great science hack.
Yeah.
Where all these sites were already dated by Clovis archaeologists in their own arguments about pre-Clovis and all that, but all that, they had all the dates right. So if you went in and got some soil from one of these sites that were type sites for the whole, transition then, if you got that soil, no one would question your dates. If you did find something weird.
Yeah.
And they found a lot of weird, but it helped support. You already had all the previous papers defining that was the last evidence of mammoth there, that it was 13,000 years ago, that it is covered with a black mat. Now just let me look at the black mat, or just under it, as I said, just under this black mat, and then I come up with this weird stuff, and at least I got my dating covered.
Right.
Now we dated it too. So then that's when West called me and said, I know that Firestone's been in touch with you. Will you help us look at these bays? We think they may contain some evidence. And I did a bunch of field work at that time, and we dug in bays. It made it into the paper. It was speculative at the time, as we said. It never reappeared for reasons I've said.
Yeah.
But my field work allowed me to kind of get entree to the team, and I've kind of persisted with them, as I call, I'm kind of bat boy,
You're the water boy or whatever.
Yeah, the water boy, the guy that's always there helping out any way I can, even though
Come on, man, you're going to do great.
You do so well. Yeah, let me go get your towel.
That's awesome, dude. I built a website 96.
Did you really? You must have been 12 years old.
A little older than that. But yeah, I still am a hardcore geek and was serious about the internet. And in 1996, I built a website. But I built mine on a video game.
Did you?
So I didn't get to be associated with like some badass scientist researchers because.
But you get those early days. Those were the Wild West.
No, I totally get it. And I built a website about it wasn't really a video game. It was an attempt at virtual reality a long time ago. And like the same.
Awesome, man.
The same thing happened to me.
Great.
Like because there were very few websites at the time that people were building, and like there were a lot of people in this attempt at virtual reality, and it was I built a website and I got all these hits, and I became like, quote unquote famous in that circle of people.
Yeah. In some little niche of a niche.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. The same thing happened to me. But I wish.
Does the domain persist? Is it still out there at all?
The domain? Well, I don't even know.
GeorgeHoward.net.
Yeah.
It's like falling apart out there. Modern browsers are less and less capable. I continue to pay the bills. I haven't touched it since Facebook came out.
Yeah. Didn't you say you lost the login?
Yeah, exactly. I lost the login.
You can't even fix it anymore.
I keep paying the bills, and it gets less and less readable. It's just horrifying. But I don't want to kill it.
Right.
No.
Hey, man, keep it alive. Let us know if it ever gets scary. We'll do a GoFundMe page for the. We're not gonna let it die.
Don't let it die, buddy.
I might pay somebody in India to go put it back together.
There you go.
Yeah. Oh Lord. But yeah, so I got stuck with this Bay thing, and not stuck with it. I still to this day, I think it's endlessly fascinating. I welcome all the research, and I should add, here's what kind of rocked things recently. That if it was controversial in the kooky caboose to the greater theory, with the Younger Dryas boundary impact hypothesis being the big, powerful engine that's getting more and more powerful of the train that's going to pull all these ideas into the station, right?
Right.
And you got the Carolina Bays as the kooky caboose, when are you going to cut it off, right? And I'm stuck in the kooky caboose to some degree.
Right.
But I long ago had entree up to the front cab, right?
Yeah.
It embarrasses me a little bit that I'm responsible for what's going on back there, as various people around the country continue to point to me. George Howard said this, or the white, or even worse, that the Younger Dryas team says this because they're still reading stuff I say, because I'll still post things that indicate to me that the thing is an open question.
Right.
And it is some honor from people who are probably more natural allies on the greater theory. Because you're still stirring this stuff up. And what stirred it up last week, and we can kind of conclude with this, last year, was a great paper that a total amateur named Antonio Zamora, who I've come to be friends with, published in the Journal of Geomorphology, the perfect journal for such a discussion.
Of course.
Published a well thought out mathematical approach that Zamora took to bay formation, and said that no, these bays are all conic sections, and the winds did not conspire to create conic sections.
What does that term mean?
Conic section is if you take a cone, like with a pointy end,
right,
and a wide end, a perfect cone, and then pass it through a plane from the side. It shows an ellipse.
I've got you.
At an angle,
conic sections, got it.
Okay. And he said, and he did all the math and said that that's just too impossible. There had to be another formation mechanism that caused something to come down into that surface plane and leave a cone.
Yeah.
And he came up, he added something a little bit new to it and this stuff, it's so, so speculative and so wild, but he did a good enough job that it deserved publication. He said that if it was related to the Younger Dryas impact, or he proposed that let's relate this to this other research that's going on,
right,
which was the greater theory, and said if something happened in the northern hemisphere of that magnitude, it would have shaken the soils of the coastal plain violently.
Yes.
That you would have had tremendous earthquakes, right?
Yep.
And what happens when you shake a saturated hydrologic sandy soil like that?
It
liquefies.
It liquids.
That's right. And you can look up on the internet, and you'll see half sunken cars or fully sunken cars with just the tailpipe sticking out with a totally solid sand surface. And, an hour before, it was like complete liquid.
Yeah.
That it would have created that liquid state, and that if something hit the ice sheet, it would have cast large chunks of ice at high velocities into the southeast potentially. The chunks of ice would have slammed into the liquefied coastal sand soils.
Yes.
And that they would have flopped out the rims as they did.
Exactly. Yep.
And that's all he said. And he's been vilified by, for that.
Stand down.
But I'll post that, and I catch a little grief from it from people that I very much respect and don't want to cause grief. But I'm going to continue to speak out on the base. But I'm somewhat agnostic. Michael Davies, who publishes at Centos.org, and also makes regular presentations at geological conferences, but he's an amateur too. He's made great progress with getting the information out there. Y'all have seen his stuff. He mentioned something that was specific to him. But Davies and Centos.org, he doesn't believe it's connected to the YD. He thinks it was 750,000 years ago.
Yeah, I remember seeing that.
Yeah. So just like any subject, when you get down to the people who are supposed to all be in league, there are about 10 different flavors of it.
Right. It's hard for just that part. It's hard for me to think that such shallow forms would last that long. You know what I mean?
That's right. Such subtle forms.
Yes.
And unfortunately, y'all are in Texas. One day you'll drive up. If you ever drive up I-95, you're surrounded by them.
Right. Yeah.
So millions of people drive through them every day, and they're everywhere in eastern North Carolina.
Right.
But you'd never know. And you're exactly right, because they're so very subtle. And
they're subtle, yeah.
Close to 1 million years seems a little long.
Right. Yeah.
He's got a thing about the age of the terraces and where they appear on this terrace versus that terrace.
Right.
But then, of all people, Alan West, who's one of the leading lights of the YDB theory, says poo on that. They're not 700 years ago. 700,000. Now, Alan isn't taking his time away from the greater seminal papers he's writing to go work the bays anymore to refute Davies's website, right?
Right. I do like his idea of an oblique impact causing this ejecta pattern. I do think that's a very interesting idea. Yeah, the oblique impact into the Saginaw.
I like Saginaw Bay now.
Yes.
I think Greenland increased Saginaw Bay's.
Yeah.
Because if you draw a line from Saginaw Bay to the Hiawatha crater, you cross over one of the most mysterious features of Canada, which is looks like a crater, smells like a crater, but doesn't test as a crater, Hudson Arc.
Hudson Arc,
right?
Yeah,
is right there in the middle.
Right.
And again, that's total rank, circumstantial internet pajama blogger evidence, but it is
conclusive proof.
Yeah, in our world, right? No, but it's predictive.
Right. Yeah.
Well, if I could add to the analogy, I see it totally plausible that the kooky caboose could turn out to be the rear engine.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Of the train.
Yeah.
Seriously. Like even if it was a more recent impact, it still challenges the reigning paradigm of uniformitarianism.
Right. It was catastrophic.
It does, but it isn't our best bet. For all your kooky audience out there and kooks alike and whatnot, speculate on, say anything you want, have at. But keep in mind that if you really want to push the ball forward, just as the YD team decided, with some of them not interested at all in the other game, but if you want to push the ball forward, you got to get with your best bets. This is a huge subject.
Yes.
You can get bogged down in all manner of circumstantial, seems like it's related. We've never been able to explain this. Right. Maybe it's related kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But you can't, which is all fine to do. But the closer you get to having to prove it, the more you have to cast a lot of stuff aside.
Right. Agreed.
Totally understand your best evidence.
Yes.
That's right.
When
you guys get that.
Yeah, when you're going to publish or whatever, but on podcasts like these, we love to connect all that stuff together.
Yeah. I'm just all about. And I can't believe some people resent that.
I'm just hoping for your original blog site, just like to like the ultimate awesome future. For the original blog site is that in the uphill battle, when that front engine can't pull the train, that rear engine just kicks on and just
kicks
boom,
on and
dude,
bam, pushes it over the hill.
I'm taking a sidetrack. I'm going to pull up in front of you. I'm going to hook up and I'm going to pull you through this, baby. If you caboose or not.
That's right.
Come on, big guy.
Yeah, one other thing I wanted to point out, I know we're going to close out here in a minute, but the other thing I was going to point out meteor crater, Behringer crater, is like accepted dating at 50,000 years ago. This is another reason why and I know it's a lot smaller than Hiawatha, but you put those two that close together and you start getting a little.
Yeah, is there more of this stuff going on?
Right. Like if it's only 50,000 years old and Hiawatha is 12,000 years old, well, we got two pretty big impacts that left a huge mark on the planet that happened extremely recently, geologically speaking.
And close together.
Right.
And statistically, they're, 25% of the Earth's more. That means you've got 3 times that you hadn't seen.
Exactly. Yep.
Right? And then you take the ice world and you add that and you say, okay, there are probably 10 of these in the last 50,000 years. How hard would it be to then say that these events have repeatedly affected Homo sapiens?
Exactly.
Culturally.
Right. Which have been around accepted numbers up to 250,000 years at this point.
That's right.
Yeah.
And but that subject remains verboten.
Yes.
Despite published, peer-reviewed, acceptable evidence to the contrary, and all they can answer with now is stone cold silence.
Right.
The very loud, stone cold silence.
That's right.
That's right.
The deafening silence of the loud people.
Yeah, always pay attention to the loud people getting quiet, because that means you're getting to it.
All right, man. Well, this has been a lot of fun and a fantastic interview. We had a lot of fun talking to you, and we hope to have you back sometime. Next time we find another crater, you're coming back on here, buddy.
Absolutely. No, it's been delightful. Y'all been gracious hosts, and I appreciate your attention to the subject and helping share it with other people. It's a lot of fun.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, man.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Okay. Over and out.
Over and out.
All right. Let's not say everything at the same time.
Okay.
That was a freaking awesome show.
Yeah, it was an amazing show.
Loved it.
Mr. George Howard, Younger Dryas Impact Hypothesis, Comet Research Group.
The Cosmic Tusk.
Cosmic Tusk. Yeah, the Tusk that was just a fantastic interview with the Tusk. And don't forget to check out his website, cosmictusk.com.
Yeah, and follow him on Twitter at Cosmic Tusk.
That's right. And you guys can get a hold of us at brothersoftheserpent@gmail.com.
Check out our website, brothersoftheserpent.com.
And you can give us comments there on all the shows, especially this one. I know you guys want to talk about this one.
Oh, yeah. Check out the encyclopedia and the glossary of terms. Right. Keep up with the Joneses over here.
Follow us on Twitter. We are at Snake Bros with no vowels, SNKBRS.
Yeah, and share the shows if you like them.
That's right. And don't forget to donate to our pyramid scheme. Send us $1 million so we can go to see pyramids. Or however much you can afford, whatever you want.
And if you don't have anything to donate, that's cool.
That's right.
Write a review.
That's right.
That helps us just as much. So
helps us a lot. And we love you guys. Thank you so much for being listeners and following us and listening to the Tusk.
Thanks a million.
That's right. Good night, Adamu. Get back to work.